Madame Kang Hae-suk pointed one perfectly manicured finger at the woman who had spent 4 years loving her son. "Eat with the staff," she said. "That is where you belong." The dining room went completely silent. 20 relatives, 3 business associates, and 4 household suspect members watched Nia Bennett Kang stand there holding an empty dinner plate she had just finished, serving food she had helped prepare, in a house the deed said belonged equally to her. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Sumin, Tae-jun's younger sister, pressed her lips together to hold back a smile and failed. Nia looked at the table. Then she looked at the kitchen doorway. Then she walked through it. If you were standing in that kitchen, watching her set that plate down with both hands to stop them from shaking, what would you have done? Would you have walked out the front door? Would you have called your husband? Or would you have stood exactly where Nia stood, staring at the wall, reminding yourself that the man you married was worth every single thing his family was putting you through? That's the question this story is going to ask you again and again until the answer becomes impossible to ignore. If this is your first time here, welcome. I want you to stay until the very end of this one, because I promise you, the moment Kang Tae-jun walks back through that front door is one of the most satisfying things you will ever witness. Hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss a story like this one. And before we go any further, drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to the beginning. Nia Bennett Kang was not the kind of woman who needed anyone to fight her battles. That was something people consistently misread about her. They looked at her softness, the way she listened before she spoke, the way she chose her words carefully, the way she never raised her voice in a room full of people raising theirs, and they confused it for timidity, for weakness, for someone who could be pushed without consequence. They were wrong. But it would take 4 years inside the Kang family mansion before that truth became undeniable. She was 32 years old, and she had spent those 4 years building a life with a man the rest of Seoul was terrified of. Kang Tae-jun did not have the kind of reputation that came from rumor or exaggeration. It was earned, methodically. Over 15 years of climbing inside an organization his own father had built from nothing, absorbing every brutal lesson that structure had to offer, and eventually becoming the thing that even the most experienced men in that world were careful not to cross. At 36, his name carried weight in rooms where names were supposed to be kept quiet. He didn't need to threaten people. He simply walked into spaces, and the temperature shifted. With Nia, none of that existed. She had met him under circumstance she still found almost impossible at dinner parties, which was why she usually didn't. A mutual friend. A rooftop gathering in Itaewon. A conversation that started about food and somehow ended with him asking if she believed that people were fundamentally good, or if that was something they performed when they felt observed. She had thought about it for a genuine 10 seconds before answering that she believed most people were somewhere in between and trying to be better than their worst impulses, and failing about 40% of the time. He had looked at her like no one had ever handed him a real answer before. 11 months later, they were married. Quietly, without the ceremony, his mother had apparently been planning in her mind for 30 years. That was the first thing Madame Kang Hae-suk never forgave. The woman was 63 years old and had spent the decades since her husband's death maintaining her position inside the Kang organization with an iron discipline that even Tae-jun respected, at least outwardly. She was not crude about her power. She never had to be. She moved through rooms the way water moves around stone, finding every available path, patient and inevitable. The family respected her. The associates deferred to her. And she had spent years constructing a very specific vision of who her eldest son would eventually bring home. It was not Nia. It was never going to be Nia, and Hae-suk had made that clear from the very first dinner, not with words, never with words, at least not when Tae-jun was seated at the table. It was in the way she addressed the household staff and then turned to Nia in the same breath without shifting her tone. It was in the way she spoke about the Kang family history in a room where Nia sat, using language that made clear she was describing something Nia was adjacent to but not part of. It was in 1,000 small architectural choices designed to make a woman feel like a guest in her own home. Tae-jun saw some of it, not all of it. Nia made sure of that. She told herself she was protecting him, and that was partly true. But it was also true that she was afraid not of his mother, not exactly, but of what asking him to choose would do to them. To him. To the particular fragile thing they had built, in the private spaces of that marriage where no one else was allowed in. Tae-jun, behind closed doors, was not what anyone expected. He was blunt in the way that men raised without softness tend to be blunt, not unkind, but unpolished. He forgot anniversaries and then remembered them 2 days late and showed up with something so unexpectedly specific that Nia couldn't even be properly angry. He slept with one arm thrown over her, like she might disappear if he lost contact. He had read exactly 4 novels in his adult life and could quote each of them in arguments in ways that were not entirely fair. When she was sick, he sat in the doorway of the bathroom, with his back against the frame, not saying anything, just there, because he hadn't figured out how to be useful and he refused to be absent. She loved him in a way that had nothing to do with what he was capable of. She also loved him in a way that was costing her something she hadn't fully accounted for. The morning Tae-jun left for Busan, Nia stood at the top of the staircase and watched his security team load into the vehicles below. He had come back upstairs specifically to find her before leaving, which she knew, because she had heard his footsteps taking the stairs 2 at a time. He only did that when he was moving toward something instead of away from it. He put both hands on either side of her face when he reached her. The gesture was very him slightly too much. No apology for it. 3 days, he said. I know. I'll have my phone. You always say that, and then you're in meetings for 9 hours. He almost smiled. If anything happens. Tae-jun. She put her hand flat on his chest. Go do your meeting. I'm fine. He looked at her for a moment longer than necessary. He did that, sometimes studied her, like he was checking for something she wasn't saying. She kept her expression steady, because she was good at that, and because whatever she was bracing for wasn't something she wanted to hand to him before he got on the road. He kissed her forehead. Then he was gone. The vehicles pulled out of the estate gates before she moved. Hae-suk found her in the kitchen an hour later. The instruction was delivered the way all of the worst things were delivered, in this house, casually, in passing, as though it barely qualified as a request. Dinner would be served for the full family that evening. Extended relatives had been invited. Nia would please ensure the meal was properly coordinated with the kitchen staff. Nia had heard the specific weight of that sentence. Not we will coordinate together. Not the staff will handle dinner. Nia would ensure. She had stood in the kitchen doorway in her own house and nodded. Because 3 days was not very long. And she had promised herself, for the 400th time, that she was not going to be the woman who fractured her husband's family over his mother's need to establish hierarchy in a room full of relatives who were already watching. The dinner preparations took most of the afternoon. Nia moved through the kitchen alongside 3 staff members, contributing more than coordinating, because sitting and directing, while others worked, felt worse than just working. She knew what she was doing in a kitchen. Her grandmother had made sure of that. Standing there chopping vegetables while the head cook adjusted seasoning, she felt briefly and absurdly like herself. It didn't last. The dining room filled up the way these gatherings always did, in layers, oldest relatives arriving first, then their children, then cousins and associates and people Nia could never quite map onto the family. Tae-jun had once tried to explain to her. She had been to enough of these dinners to know the shape of the evening. She had also been to enough of them to know where her absence would be noted and where it wouldn't. She served, quietly, efficiently, without making it theatrical. It was only when she had finished and picked up a plate for herself and turned toward the table that Hae-suk spoke. The words were short. They were delivered in front of 20 people. They were designed with precision to land where they landed. Who told you that you could sit with us? Naya's hand tightened on the plate. The room did not go silent all at once. It went silent in stages, the nearest relatives first, then the ripple outward, as people registered that something was happening and adjusted accordingly. Sumin, seated to her mother's left, looked down at her bowl. The looking down was almost worse than watching. Eat with the staff, Hae-suk said, her voice carrying the particular calm of someone who had planned this exact moment. That is where you belong. Naya stood there for 3 full seconds. She was not counting. She just remembered afterward that it felt long. Long enough for her to cycle through every version of what she could say and land on the understanding that none of them were worth what they would cost. Not tonight. Not in front of this room. Not when Tae-jun was 4 hours away, and the only person who would pay the ongoing price of her anger was herself. She set the plate down on a side table. She walked into the kitchen. She stood with her back against the counter until her hands stopped shaking enough that she could trust them. The staff ate in near silence. The cook, a woman named Mrs. O, who had worked in the mansion for 11 years, set a bowl of soup in front of Nia without comment. That small gesture, the complete absence of pity or explanation, just soup, here, sits was the only thing from that evening that Nia would remember without anger. She ate alone. In the hallway outside, she could hear Hae-suk's voice floating from the dining room, clear and confident and pleased. That night, Nia sat on the edge of the bed she shared with Tae-jun and called her sister in Atlanta. She didn't tell her everything. She didn't tell her the specific sentence or the specific room or the specific faces. She said she was having a hard week and that she missed home, which was true in the way that true things are true when they're also incomplete. Her sister said, "You can always come back, you know." Nia said, "I know." She didn't tell her sister that coming back had stopped being a clean option years ago. That somewhere between the rooftop in Itaewon and the quiet of a man sleeping with his arm across her like a promise, she had made a choice that you couldn't unmake by buying a plane ticket. She hung up. She looked at the ceiling. She did not cry. That was the first night. The second day began with her belongings. She discovered it, the way you discover most humiliations, not all at once, but in pieces that eventually assemble into something you can't unsee. She had gone upstairs to get a book from the bedroom. The closet was open. Her clothes were still hanging. But the vanity had been cleared. Her perfumes, the photograph of her and Tae-jun from the night of a charity function that he had framed himself and placed on her side of the dresser moved. The framed photograph was face down on a chair in the corner as though someone had knocked it over and not bothered to pick it up. Nia walked to it, turned it over, put it back exactly where it had been. Then she went downstairs and found a housekeeper in the corridor who would not meet her eyes. By afternoon, 2 of her bags had been moved to the room at the end of the East Hall, a guest room that had not been occupied in months and smelled faintly of disuse. Her toiletries were in the bathroom there. Her books were stacked on the guest room nightstand. Nobody told her. Nobody explained. She simply walked down the East Hall and found her life repositioned. She went back to the master bedroom. She unpacked her own bags. She put her photograph back on the dresser. She hung her things back in the closet. That evening, they were moved again. The third morning brought Soo-min. Naya had kept a small wooden box on the shelf in the sitting room that adjoined the master bedroom. Tae-jun had given it to her after a trip he'd taken to Jeju in their first year of marriage, a carved thing. Simple, the kind of object that mattered more because of where it came from than what it was. She had kept a few things in it, nothing valuable by any measure anyone in this house would recognize. A letter her grandmother had written her. A photograph she'd taken herself at a market in Gwangjong, the summer so they first moved into the mansion. A small folded piece of paper with a note in Tae-jun's handwriting that she had never shown anyone because it was private in the way that the best things are private. Someone came to find her in the upstairs sitting room mid-morning, wearing an expression of manufactured distress. "I'm so sorry," Soo-min said, and she was already holding the wooden box, which Nia immediately understood meant the apology was not going to involve the box being intact. It was completely an accident. I don't know how it happened. The lid was cracked. The latch was bent wrong. The letter from her grandmother was there, and the market photograph was there. The folded note in Tae-jun's handwriting was not. "Where is the note that was inside?" Nia asked. "Note?" Soo-min's expression arranged itself into confusion with the efficiency of long practice. "I'd see any note. I just found it on the floor. It must have fallen from somewhere. The box was on the shelf, Nia said. Yes, well, I'm sorry. It really was an accident. Sumin placed the damaged box in Nia's hands and left the room with the particular ease of someone who has already moved on from something before the other person has finished processing it. Nia sat down. The note had been 4 sentences. She remembered all of them. That wasn't the point. The point was that it was gone taken, probably, more to prove it could be done than for any specific purpose. The point was the broken latch. The point was the expression on Sumin's face that contained underneath the performed remorse a satisfaction she had not quite fully concealed. Nia held the box for a while. Then she set it down. Then she opened her phone and stared at Tae-jun's contact for 60 seconds before putting it away. She was not going to call him over this. She was not going to call him and tell him. His sister had broken something that mattered and taken something she had no right to touch. Because calling him meant starting a chain of events that would end with him choosing, and she was still not ready to be the reason he looked at his family that way. Still not ready to be the woman who couldn't handle 3 days. That was her mistake. She understood it later, looking back. Silence is only a shield up to the point where the people you're protecting from your pain mistake it for permission. Breakfast on the 3rd day was a particular kind of theater. Extended relatives occupied both sides of the long dining table. An aunt who visited twice a year and spoke about Tae-jun's accomplishments, the way people speak about things that belong to them by proximity. 2 cousins whose connection to the main family, Nia, had never been able to clarify, and an older man whose role in the organization Tae-jun had described once as complicated, and then changed the subject. Nia was present, seated at the far end. Technically at the table, no one had moved her plate this morning, but positioned so definitively at its edge that her presence registered more like punctuation than participation. The conversation began, as it had been clearly arranged to begin, with someone mentioning a mutual acquaintance's daughter who had recently become engaged to a young executive from the Shin family. A good match, everyone agreed. Strong families, the right connections. The girl had studied abroad, which was noted approvingly. Her background was clean and comprehensible. Her family and the Shin family had known each other for years. Someone else agreed. These things mattered, didn't they? Alliances. Mutual strength. The difference between a marriage that built something and a marriage that simply, well, didn't. Nia ate her rice. Nobody looked at her. The looking at was distributed all around her, constructing an absence in her exact shape. The aunt mentioned a name Nia hadn't heard before. Yoon So-soa. Did anyone know the Yoon family? Oh, everyone knew the Yoon family. Influential. Grounded. Soa herself had studied economics, spoke 3 languages, had spent time in London. Beautiful, naturally. Very poised. She's visiting soon, Hae-suk said from the head of the table. Conversationally. The way you mentioned the weather. I thought it would be good for the family to spend some time together. Nobody specified what kind of visiting. Nobody needed to. Nia set her chopsticks down with exactly enough care that they didn't make a sound. She excused herself from the table quietly, without drama, and walked upstairs to the bedroom that had been restored to her only because she had personally restored it twice. She sat on the edge of the bed. She was not going to fall apart. She had decided, somewhere around the second bag moving incident, that falling apart was not available to her as an option until she was on the other side of whatever this was becoming. Falling apart in this house, in front of these people, in Tae-jun's absence, felt like something she would never fully recover from. Not because of pride, exactly. Because of something more specific, the knowledge that if she let them see it, she would always be the woman who had broken in the Kang family mansion, and that was a story she refused to give them. She picked up her phone. She looked at Tae-jun's contact again. She put the phone face down on the mattress. She was still sitting there when she heard a car door, distantly, from the front of the estate. She didn't think anything of it. Cars came and went. Security rotations. Staff deliveries. She didn't move. Downstairs in the corridor outside the kitchen, a side door that most of the household had stopped thinking about opened quietly. Footsteps moved through the lower level steady, Unhurried, the particular kind of unhurried that belongs to someone who knows exactly where they are and exactly where they're going. The meeting in Busan had ended 43 hours ahead of schedule. The other party had conceded on the fourth point faster than anticipated, and there was nothing left to negotiate that couldn't wait for paperwork. Tae-jun had not called ahead. He generally didn't. His security team was trained to match whatever pace he was moving at, and right now he was moving at the pace of a man who had spent 3 days away from home and wanted to walk through his own front door. He came in through the side. He could hear voices from the dining room. He was still in his rain-damp suit, his tie loosened, when he rounded the corner of the lower corridor toward the main hall and caught the first thread of what was being said inside that room. He stopped walking, his head tilted slightly. The voice that reached him first was his mother's, clear, carrying the weight of someone fully convinced of her own authority. And then, rising above it with a steadiness that Tae-jun recognized the way, you recognize something you've heard in a completely different register lower, private, intimate, was Nia's voice. He stood in the corridor, he listened, and as he stood there, the understanding of what had been happening in his house, while he was 4 hours away, assembling itself in his mind, piece by piece, with the specific and terrible clarity of a man who is realizing that the silence his wife had been keeping was not evidence that nothing was wrong. It was evidence of how much she loved him. His jaw set. He didn't move yet. He listened to every word. The meeting in Busan had, in Tae-jun's assessment, been the easier negotiation of the week. He stood in that corridor for a long time, longer than he should have. Longer than made sense for a man who moved through difficult situations with the practiced calm of someone who had spent 15 years ensuring that the speed of his reaction never telegraphed the depth of his response. But this was different. This was his house, his corridor, his wife's voice carrying from the room at the end of it, and the specific, controlled steadiness in that voice was the thing that undid him faster than any of the words she was saying. He knew that voice. He knew the version of it she used in private, when her guard something was fully down, when she laughed something before she decided whether it was appropriate to laugh. He knew the version she used when she was working through something difficult and needed to talk in circles before arriving at the center of it. He knew the version she used when she was frightened and was making the deliberate and exhausting choice not to show it. That was the version he was hearing now. Controlled. Careful. Stripped of every unnecessary thing, the way a person strips everything unnecessary when they are conserving energy for something they've been doing for a very long time. He listened to his mother's voice beneath it, and then he listened to what his mother's voice was actually saying, past the shape of the words, into the intention underneath them, and what he heard was not a woman making a point. It was a woman finishing something she had started while he was gone. His right hand found the wall beside him and pressed flat against it. Not for balance, he didn't need the balance, but because he needed one surface in this corridor to be still while the rest of the room rearranged itself around what he was understanding. The dinner. He'd gotten the message about a family dinner and hadn't thought about it beyond registering it. A dinner. His mother hosted dinners. That was something she did. Naya had not mentioned anything when he'd called 2 days ago. The call had been short 9 minutes. He remembered because he had been between meetings and stepped outside specifically to hear her voice. And she had said she was fine. She had said the house was quiet. She had said he should focus on the negotiation and not worry. She had said that last part with a lightness he had not questioned in the moment because he wanted to believe it, which was a different thing from having reason to believe it. And he understood the difference now, standing in this corridor with his suit, still damp from rain that had been falling on a city she was not in. The voices in the dining room shifted. A new one entered, a woman's laugh, brief and bright and completely comfortable with itself, the laugh of someone who had walked into that room and found the temperature already set to welcome. Tae-jun straightened. He moved toward the dining room entrance, slowly enough that his footsteps didn't carry, and positioned himself just inside the shadow of the corridor, where the angle of the doorway gave him line of sight into approximately 2/3 of the room without placing him inside it. What he saw took him less than 4 seconds to fully read. The table was set for a formal dinner, not a family gathering, a production. Candles, the good serving dishes. Extra chairs brought in from the secondary dining room that were only used when his mother wanted the room to look like a statement. Relatives occupied most of the seats in the configuration he recognized, from occasions where presence was being counted. An older cousin, 2 aunts, business associate from the Shin side of a partnership that Tae-jun had been managing carefully for 2 years. And in the seat to the left of his own chair, his chair, which was sitting empty at the head, a woman he had seen photographs of exactly once, approximately 14 months ago. In a file his mother had left on his desk, with the specific casualness of a woman who knew what she was doing. Yoon Seo-ah was in her early 30s, composed in the way that people are composed when composure has been practiced since childhood as a social requirement. She was positioned in that chair, not like a guest, but like someone who had been placed there. The placement was architectural, deliberate. His mother's work, right down to the specific angle of the chair and the particular glass of wine sitting in front of it. His mother was standing, and Nia was on the far side of the room. He took that in. His wife was standing near the serving table at the room's edge, not seated, not positioned as any kind of participant in this gathering, and the way she was standing told him everything the dinner invitation hadn't. She was holding herself with the exact rigid stillness of someone who had been standing in variations of that position for considerably longer than this one evening, and she was looking at his mother with an expression that he recognized the way you recognize something you've been shown in private, the tight, deliberate quiet of a woman who has made the decision not to break in front of a room full of people who are waiting for it. Hae-suk was speaking. The words reached him in sequence, and each one landed with the particular weight of something that had been chosen, refined, and delivered at maximum precision. His mother was comparing Naya's educational background against Seo-ah's. Nia's family connections framed as their absence against the Yoon family's established networks. The word suitable appeared twice in under a minute, each time positioned as a quality that one woman in the room possessed, and the other demonstrably did not. He watched Naya's face across the room. She did not look at the table. She did not look at Seo-ah. She kept her eyes on his mother with the focus of someone who is making a specific choice about where to anchor themselves, and that choice was costing her something he could see even from across a room. Then his mother said, "You were a mistake my son hasn't corrected yet." The dining room went to a particular kind of quiet, not the quiet of an empty space, but the quiet of 20 people collectively and silently deciding how much of what they'd just witnessed they were going to absorb versus pretend had not occurred. Tae-jun's hand, which had been resting against the doorframe, went still. He watched Nia. He saw her throat move, saw the breath she pulled in through her nose, measured, controlled, the breath of someone keeping something from coming up. Saw her hands, clasped in front of her at the level of her waist, tighten once and release. And then he watched her speak. "If Tae-jun ever tells me he doesn't love me anymore, I'll leave," she said. The voice was quiet. It was not shaking, but I won't abandon my husband because his family wants another woman in my place. He didn't breathe. His mother drew herself up. "Then I'll make you leave." And Tae-jun stepped through the doorway. He didn't announce himself. Didn't need to. The first person to see him was the Shin associate, whose expression shifted with an immediacy that spread outward across the room, the way a stone dropped in still. Water sends rings that reach every edge. Heads turned. Someone at the far end of the table made a sound that wasn't quite a word and stopped. Sumin looked up from the glass she had been studying, and her face underwent 3 different expressions in approximately 1 second. His mother, whose back was partially toward the door, registered the room's change before she registered him. She turned. She saw him. Whatever she had been planning to say to Naya next did not make it out of her. Tae-jun stood in the doorway in his rain-damp suit tie loosened, jacket darker at the shoulders where the rain had soaked through, and he looked at the room. Specifically, he looked at Seo-ah in the chair beside his own. His wife's belongings, a jacket, a book, a small bag, and a stacked pile near the secondary entrance, as though they had been collected from somewhere and deposited here. And Nia's face, which had turned toward him, and across which he was watching something he had never seen there before. She was not crying. She was close. He could see the exact location of the line she was holding herself behind, and the effort that holding was requiring, and the way she was looking at him, not with relief, not with accusation, but with the specific and exhausted expression of someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has just looked up to find that the distance they still need to cover is considerably shorter than they thought. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at his mother. Hae-suk found her voice first. That was something Tae-jun had always given her. She never lost it for long. Tae-jun, you're back early. She said it steadily, as if steadiness could retroactively restructure what had been happening in this room. I heard, he said. 2 words. He watched her absorb them. The corridor, she said. From the corridor. He moved into the room. Not quickly. He crossed the distance between the doorway and the center of the room the way he moved through any space he owned outright, with the particular unhurried certainty of someone who has never needed to rush, because nothing in the room was going to change in his absence. He stopped when he was equidistant from his mother and his wife. He did not look at Seoa. He did not look at the relatives. He did not look at the associate, who, at this point, was paying extremely careful attention to the tablecloth. How long has this been happening? The question was not for his mother. He was looking at Nia. She met his eyes. He saw her make the calculation, the one she had apparently been making for months, the one where she decided how much to tell him and landed on protection rather than honesty. He watched her do it, and for the first time, he let her see that he already knew the answer, which meant the calculation didn't need to be made. A while, she said, and then immediately, Tae-jun, this doesn't need to. Where are your things? She paused. Where, he said it again, the same register, completely level. Your things, Nia. Where are they? She looked at the stacked bags near the secondary entrance. He turned and looked at them. He turned back. His eyes found Soo-min, who had placed her glass down at some point in the last 60 seconds, with a care that indicated she was managing her own breathing. You moved her belongings. Soo-min opened her mouth. Don't explain it, he said. I'm telling you what I know. Not asking. The room was entirely silent. Hae-suk stepped forward. She had the specific bearing of a woman who had walked into difficult rooms for 60 years and had not yet encountered one she couldn't navigate if she moved correctly. You don't have the full picture. There are things you don't understand about what this family needs. I understand, Tae-jun said, that my wife served dinner to this room and was told to eat somewhere else. Nobody confirmed it. Nobody denied it. The silence was its own confirmation. His jaw moved slightly. That was the only external indication of what the confirmation cost him. You should have called me, he said. And this was addressed to Nia, and it came out rougher than he'd intended, not angry at her, but something adjacent to it, the voice of a man who is angry at a situation and has enough precision to keep it directed correctly. You should have called me the first night. I didn't want you to have to choose, Nia said. Quietly, directly, no apology in it. The specific honesty of that sentence hit the room differently than anything his mother had said in the last hour, because it had no performance in it. It was simply what was true, and the room full of people who had been performing for an entire evening received it like a key change. Tae-jun looked at her for a long moment. Something crossed his face that the relatives would describe later to each other, in hushed kitchen conversations, as an expression they had never seen on Kang Tae-jun. They were not entirely wrong. It wasn't an expression he had needed to wear often, because the occasions that produced it were rare. It was grief, not the loud, disorganized kind. The kind that arrives once you fully understand what something cost someone you love while you were not paying enough attention. He looked away from her, back at his mother. Hae-suk had miscalculated the silence. She read it as an opening. She moved into it the way she always moved into openings, with conviction, because conviction had always been her most reliable tool. You are angry now, that's natural. But when you think clearly, you will see that everything I have done has been to protect this family. What you have built, what your father built. She is... Be careful, he said. The 2 words arrived with a specific frequency that made Hae-suk stop speaking mid-sentence. He did not raise his voice. He had not raised his voice once since entering the room. He did not need to. The men who worked for him had learned, in the first months of working for him, that the volume of his voice was not a reliable indicator of how serious a moment was. The serious moments were quiet. The very serious moments were quieter still. This moment was very quiet. "Be careful," he said again, "about what you say next, and about what you were about to say." Hae-suk held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she looked away first, which was not something she did easily, and which registered in the room the way large objects moving register you feel it, before you fully see it. Tae-jun turned to the Shin associate, whose name was Park, and who had the good sense to look like he genuinely wished he were in Busan. "You'll excuse the family," Tae-jun said. It was phrased as a courtesy, and was not one. Park understood this, and was on his feet within moments, with the speed of a man correctly prioritizing his own continued well-being. The relatives moved more slowly, but they moved. The cousins, the aunts, the older man from the organization's peripheral edge who had been seated at the far end of the table and who caught Tae-jun's eye once on his way out, with an expression that contained something like apology and something like recognition. Tae-jun did not respond to it. Seo-ah rose from her chair. She was composed about. It had been composed throughout, which Tae-jun recognized as intelligence rather than coldness. The composure of a woman who understood she had been placed in this room by someone else's agenda and was managing the situation with as much dignity as was available to her. He didn't blame her. She hadn't built this table, or chosen this chair, or set any of this in motion. He looked at her briefly as she passed. "I'll have someone drive you to the hotel, factual. Not unkind. The family will be in touch with yours." Whatever she understood about what that meant, she showed none of it. She nodded once and left the room. That left Tae-jun, Nia, Hae-suk, and Sumin, and the pile of Naya's belongings near the door, which was still there, which Tae-jun had not looked at again since the first time, and would not look at again because looking at it a second time was not something he was capable of right now. Without consequences, he wasn't ready to produce in this room. Sumin broke first. She had always broken first. Even as children, she had inherited their mother's nerve, but not the full depth of the patience that made nerve sustainable, and the room had simply been running at a frequency too high for too long. "You don't know everything," Sumin said. The defiance in her voice was real, but its foundation wasn't. He could hear the wobble underneath it, not fear of him specifically, but the fear of having been seen doing something she'd half known she shouldn't be doing. She never fit here. You chose someone without thinking about what it would mean for the rest of us, and we've been managing the consequences for 4 years. You broke something of hers, Tae-jun said. Sumin stopped. "Small wooden box," he said. "What was in it?" The color in Sumin's face shifted. "I don't know what was in it, Sumin." She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the answer became unnecessary. He turned to Nia. "The note I left you." It wasn't a question. He watched her face confirm it. Something in his chest did something it had not done. In a long time, tightened past the point of utility, the specific tightening that was the body's way of processing the gap between what was and what should have been. He breathed through it, evenly. He was very practiced at that. "I'll tell you what's going to happen tonight," he said to the room, to no particular person in it. "No one is going to explain themselves to me right now. No one is going to argue. No one is going to describe their intentions or their reasoning or the history of their grievances." He moved toward the door. He looked at Nia. "Come upstairs." Tae-jun Hae-suk started. "Not tonight," he said. He didn't look at her. "Whatever you need to say to me, it keeps until tomorrow." He walked out of the dining room. Nia followed him. In the corridor, away from the room, his pace slowed marginally. Not enough that anyone watching would have called it hesitation. Enough that she could fall into step beside him rather than behind him, which he did, intentionally, though he would not have been able to explain that intention cleanly if asked. They went upstairs in silence. In the master bedroom, Tae-jun sat on the edge of the bed with his elbows on his knees and his hands folded in front of him, and he looked at the floor for what felt like a long time but was probably 60 seconds. Nia sat in the chair near the window, not on the bed beside him. That specific distance was something both of them understood without negotiating it. He needed to sit with what he was carrying before he could sit with her, and she had been reading him long enough to give him that without being asked. "How long?" he said. Not accusatory. "Tired. The dinner where you were away in Tokyo," she said. That was the first time it was this direct. Tokyo. That had been 8 months ago. He filed that somewhere that would require revisiting. "What else?" she told him. Not all of it at once, she found the telling difficult, which was something he'd never seen from her before in this specific register, and the difficulty of it was its own information. She told him about the dinners, about the staff instructions, about the relatives and the names and the chair placement, about the bags. She told him about the box, and about Sumin's face when she delivered it, and about the note that had been inside it. He didn't interrupt, didn't move. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You should have told me," he said. "I know, not for me." He looked up at her. "For you. You shouldn't have been carrying this." She held his gaze. "I didn't want to make you choose." "Nia." He said her name with the specific someone who has run out of patience with a particular argument and needs to name that clearly. There was never a choice to be made. "You understand that?" She didn't answer immediately, which itself an answer. He looked at the wall. The exhaustion of the drive, back from Busan, which he hadn't registered until this moment because there had been too many other things to register, arrived now with full weight. "I'm going to need the security team to pull the internal footage." She looked at him. "Surveillance," he said. "The house systems have been running for 2 years. If what you're describing has been happening for 8 months, there's a record of it." He looked at her carefully. "You knew that?" "Yes," she said. "And you didn't mention it." "I was hoping it wouldn't need to go there." He understood that. He didn't agree with it, but he understood it with the specific understanding who has watched specific sendik of someone who besek the person he loves absorb damage, while protecting everyone around her from the knowledge of it, and found the understanding itself to be a kind of wound. He pulled out his phone. 2 messages to his head of security, brief, specific, with time parameters and the location codes for the surveillance system. Then he set the phone face down on the bed. He looked at her. "Your things were moved twice," he said. 3 times, counting tonight. He absorbed that. The photograph on the dresser. She blinked. "You noticed." "I notice everything in this room," he said. Simply, without performance. "I noticed the first night I got back from Tokyo. I thought you'd rearranged." They looked at each other. And beneath the exhaustion and the grief and the particular, grinding anger that he was managing with every tool available to him, there was something else between them, the specific intimacy of 2 people who have just stepped past a thing that was obscuring the view and can now see clearly again. It was not comfortable. It was not resolved. But it was real in a way the last 8 months of managed silence had not been. And real was what they both needed more than comfort. "Sleep," he said finally. "Tomorrow is going to be a long day." He said it with the steady certainty of a man who has already begun building something in the architecture of his mind and knows the shape of what it's going to require. "You need to sleep. I need to think." She looked at him for a moment. Then she stood, crossed the room, and sat beside him on the bed. She didn't say anything. She leaned her head against his shoulder with the ease of someone who had done that exact thing 1,000 times, and he lifted his arm and put it around her with the same ease. And they sat there in the quiet of a room that had been stripped of her things, and refilled with them, and stripped again, in a house that bore her name on its deed, but had spent 8 months trying to make her feel otherwise. He was not a man who slept easily when there was something unresolved. He was not going to sleep at all. His phone, face down beside him, vibrated once. He reached for it. The message from his security chief was 4 words, footage retrieved. "You'll want to see this." He sat with that message for a long moment, his arm still around his wife, her breathing evening out beside him, as the exhaustion finally claimed what she'd been too determined to surrender earlier. Then he typed back tomorrow morning. My office. Full record. He set the phone down. He looked at the ceiling of a room that was his and hers and had been used against both of them. And he began to understand, with the specific and terrible clarity of a man who processes things fully and then acts on them precisely, that what his mother had been building in his absence was not a correction. It was a declaration. And declarations required a response that matched their weight. He was already composing it. The next morning arrived gray and close, the kind of morning that holds its weather, like a decision not yet made. Tae-jun was in his ground floor office. By 6 he had not slept, which was fine. He had needed the hours more for thinking than for rest. His security chief, a precise and economical man named Woo, arrived at 6:15 and placed a tablet on the desk without preamble, which was why Tae-jun employed him. The footage ran for 4 hours. Not 4 hours of anything dramatic. The dramatics, when they appeared, were embedded in long stretches of ordinary household time meals, corridors, the sitting room off the master bedroom, and what they documented was not a single incident but a pattern. The architecture of a campaign. He watched his mother instruct the housekeeper, twice, to relocate Nia's belongings. He watched his sister enter the upstairs sitting room, remove the wooden box from the shelf, with 2 hands and no particular rush, examine its contents, extract one item with care, and then drop the box deliberately from a height of approximately 3 feet before picking it up and carrying it down the corridor. He watched the breakfast, where his name had been used, as a measuring rod against his wife's existence, while his wife sat at the edge of the table and ate in silence. He watched the dinner the night before his mother's face as she said the words, his wife's face as she received them, the room watching both. He turned the tablet face down on the desk before the footage finished. Woo, who had been standing, said nothing. Copies, Tae-jun said. Secured on 3 servers, Woo said. Pull the full record from the past 8 months. Cross-reference with the incident log from the household. He sat back. And find out everything there is to know about how the Yoon family invitation was arranged. I want to know who initiated the first contact. Woo nodded. He moved toward the door. Woo. He stopped. Whatever you find, Tae-jun said carefully. Keep it quiet until I'm ready to use it. Woo understood the specific meaning of ready in that context, and showed that understanding in the way he showed things without expression, with complete comprehension. He left. Tae-jun sat alone in the office. He thought about the note in his own handwriting that was no longer where it was supposed to be. He thought about his wife in the kitchen of her own house eating alone, while relatives used his name in the next room to justify the arrangement. He thought about 4 years of private tenderness and public silence, and the precise, patient, 8-month project that his family had been running while he trusted the wrong people's version of how things were. He thought about his mother's face last night when he'd stepped into the room. The fraction of a second between when she understood and when she composed herself in that fraction, he had seen something that he would not name out loud to anyone but recognized clearly. She had expected to succeed, not just to create difficulty, not just to apply pressure, not to apply pressure. She had been running an operation with a specific intended outcome, and she had been running it with the confidence of someone who believed the operation was working. That was the part that sat in him the worst, not the cruelty. He had known cruelty existed in the world and in the people adjacent to him, and had built systems around managing it. The cruelty he could address. What sat in him was the architecture, the patience of it, the number of individual decisions that had been made over 8 months by people who ate at his table and received his money and used his name as a credential decisions made in the specific faith that his wife would not tell him, and that even if she did, his sense of family obligation would buffer the consequences. They had built their plan around his blind spots. That was what he was sitting with when his office door opened and his mother walked in. She had changed, slept, composed herself fully. She was wearing a dark jacket and had her hair pinned. She arrived for difficult conversations the way she arrived for everything. Prepared. She closed the door behind her. She sat in the chair across the desk from him without being invited to, which something she had always done and which he had always allowed, and which now registered differently. I want to speak to you before this goes further, she said. Go ahead, he said. She took a breath. She looked at him the way she had looked at him since he was a child, as someone whose nature she had largely authored and therefore retained a claim to understand. I know you're angry. I accept that. But I need you to hear the full picture of why I did what I did, because anger without context leads to decisions that damage things that can't be rebuilt. He said nothing. He looked at her. He waited. She spoke for 11 minutes. He tracked the time on the clock to his left. She spoke about his father's legacy, which was real and which she was not wrong to care about. She spoke about the organization's relationships with other families, the social architecture of alliances and expectations, the weight of a name that preceded every room Tae-jun entered and required maintenance that he was sometimes too close to see clearly. She spoke about Nia not with the cruelty of the dining room. Here she was careful. Here she wore the version she used when she was negotiating rather than performing. And what she said about Nia was not that she was insufficient, but that she was a complication, an unresolved variable in a system that required stability and predictability and known quantities. She finished. She looked at him. He looked at the desk between them for a moment. Then he looked up. You had a housekeeper move my wife's belongings out of our bedroom, he said. 3 times. She held his gaze. I understand why that. My sister took a private note I wrote to my wife out of a box she'd been keeping it in and removed it. His voice had not changed register. It had not risen. If anything, it had dropped slightly, which was more information than volume would have been. You seated another woman in my chair, at my table, in my house, to replace my wife. At a dinner you organized specifically for that purpose. In front of relatives and a business associate, Hae-suk said carefully, I was trying to open to conversations. You were trying to finish one, he said. You were trying to end my marriage in my absence and present me with the outcome when I returned. And you were counting on the fact that I wouldn't burn the house down over it because of who you are to me. The silence that followed was the longest one yet. His mother looked at him for a long moment. Tae-jun, you're going to leave the mansion, he said. She went completely still. Today, he said. The word landed like something structural giving way. You're my son, she said. It came out quieter than anything she'd said since entering the room. Quieter than Tae-jun had heard from her in years. I know who I am, he said. And I know what happened in this house. And I know you are sitting in front of me right now explaining your reasoning, which means you are not sitting in front of me with any version of an apology. Which tells me something important. He stood. You have until this afternoon to arrange where you're going. I'll have Woo coordinate whatever you need for the move. Hae-suk did not move immediately. That was the first thing. She sat in the chair across from her son with her hands folded in her lap and her back straight, and she did not move, which was not the same thing as not responding. She was processing. Tae-jun had watched her process difficult information his entire life, and he knew the specific quality of her when she was doing it. The way she absorbed a thing fully before deciding what to do with it. The way she never wasted a reaction on something that hadn't been fully assessed. She assessed this for approximately 30 seconds. Then she said, You are making a decision you will not be able to reverse. I know, he said. I am your mother. I know that too. She looked at him with the expression of a woman who has raised something and is encountering, for the first time at full resolution, the specific way it has grown past what she built. It was not a simple expression. It contained grief and anger, and something older than both of those, the particular devastation of a person who has spent decades believing they understood a situation, and is being shown in one morning that the understanding was incomplete. Everything I did, she said, was because I love you. I believe that, Tae-jun said. He said it without hesitation and without warmth. It doesn't change what I said. She stood. She smoothed the front of her jacket with 2 careful passes of her palms. She looked at him one more time, not searching, not pleading, just looking, in the way that people look at things they are about to lose access to and need to memorize. Then she walked to the door. She put her hand on the frame and stopped. When you were 8 years old, she said, not turning, you fell off the roof of the second building on the north property. Do Do you remember? You were trying to see the city from the top. You were up there for 2 hours before anyone found you, and when your father's men finally got up there to bring you down, you told them you didn't need help, that you'd found a way down on your own." She paused. "You had not found a way down. You were completely stuck. But you would not admit it." She took her hand off the frame. "That boy is still in there. I hope he's careful." She left. The door closed. Tae-jun stood in the silence of the office for a long moment. Then he sat back down. He turned the tablet face up. He pressed play on the footage he'd stopped watching earlier. He watched the rest. The full picture was worse than the partial one, which he had expected. And, knowing he'd expected, it did not make it easier to absorb. The 8 months of surveillance footage that Woo's team had compiled and cross-referenced told a story that had been running concurrently with a different story. Tae-jun had been living same house, same rooms, different reality depending on whether he was present. The camera didn't editorialize. It simply showed him the breakfast, where his wife had been discussed like a problem in need of a solution, while she sat feet away eating in silence. It showed him the corridor, where a housekeeper had been quietly instructed, on 3 separate occasions, to relocate items from the master bedroom. It showed him the sitting room and his sister and the box, and what Sumin's face looked like when she was doing something she knew she shouldn't, a specific furtive concentration that was not the face of someone committing an accident. He stopped the footage at one particular frame. It was from a dinner he had attended. He was visible in the corner of the frame, his back to the camera, speaking to the Shin associate about a logistics matter. Naya was across the room. His mother was between them. And what the camera had caught, what he was seeing now, the first time, because he had been facing the wrong direction, was the precise moment his mother had leaned toward one of his aunts and said something behind the cover of a serving dish that made the aunt press her mouth flat and look at Nia and then look away. He had been in the room. He had been 10 feet away. He had not seen it. He turned the tablet face down again. He sat with that for a while. Then he made 3 phone calls. The first was to the family's primary attorney, a fastidious man named Choi, who had handled Kang business for 20 years and who received the call at 7:40 in the morning without complaint, because complaint was not something you offered Tae-jun. He gave Choi a specific set of instructions regarding the mansion's ownership documentation, the structure of several financial accounts, and the matter of Sumin's accounts, which he outlined with a specificity that left no room for interpretation. Choi's asked 2 clarifying questions, received 2 direct answers, and said he would have the documentation prepared by afternoon. The second call was to the head of family business relations, a woman named Ji Young, who coordinated external partnerships and family-adjacent alliances. He told her that the Yoon family connection was to be closed. No further contact, no explanation beyond what was structurally necessary. Ji Young received this without audible reaction, which was why she had held the position for 6 years with. The third call was to his senior organization members, not all of them. The 4 who constituted the inner circle that had been with him long enough to understand when something was happening at the level that required witness rather than participation. He told them to be at the mansion the following evening. He did not explain why. He did not need to. He set the phone down. He thought about the note. It was 4 sentences. He had written it on a Tuesday evening during the first year of their marriage, on a piece of paper torn from the bottom of a report he'd been reading, because he had wanted to say something to her before she woke up, and the nearest available paper was the report. He had left it in the kitchen. She had apparently kept it for 3 years in a box on a shelf where it had been taken by his sister and was now somewhere else entirely. He didn't know where, and that not knowing was a specific and ridiculous grief that he was having difficulty filing appropriately alongside the larger, more structural grievances of the morning. He wrote it again, from memory, on a clean piece of paper from the desk drawer. All 4 sentences. Exact. He folded it and put it in his jacket pocket. He would give it back to her later. He didn't know exactly when. He would know when the moment was right, and that was not now, because now he had something else to deal with. He went upstairs. Nia was awake. She was sitting at the window in the bedroom with a cup of coffee that had probably gone cold because the angle of the light said it had been sitting there a while, and she was looking at the garden below with a particular focused absence of someone thinking through something rather than seeing what's in front of them. She heard him come in and turned. "She's leaving today," he said. Nia looked at him carefully. "You talked to her. She came to me." He moved to the bed and sat. He looked at his wife across the room. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it without it becoming an argument about whether I'm right." She set the cup down. "Okay. I watched the footage this morning. All of it." He paused. "I was at the dinner with the Shin associate, the one in March. I was in the room. I was 10 feet from you." She was quiet. "I didn't see it," he said. "I know I should have." "Tae-jun, I'm not looking for absolution," he said. The word came out slightly rough. Not polished, he had not rehearsed this, which meant it was arriving in the order that it was actually occurring to him, rather than the order he would have chosen if he'd had time to arrange it. "I'm telling you that I understand what you were protecting me from, and I'm telling you that you shouldn't have had to. And I'm telling you that the protection, the silence cost you something I can see, now that I couldn't see before, because I was on the wrong side of it." She looked at him. Her face was doing something complicated. He had seen face in private. Before, it was the face she wore when she was receiving something she had needed for long enough that receiving it was almost more difficult than continuing to go without it. He watched her work through whatever that required and waited for her to finish. "Okay," she said finally. Simply, "Okay," he said. That was the whole conversation. It was enough. He left her to finish the coffee and went back downstairs to manage what the rest of the morning required. What the morning required was considerable. The household staff had absorbed the previous night's events through the particular efficient osmosis of people who work in close proximity to conflict without being direct participants in it. They knew the shape of what had happened without necessarily knowing the specific content, and the shape was enough to alter the climate of the house in ways that were immediately perceptible. There was a careful quality to how they moved through the corridor, a studied attention to their own tasks. Mrs. The cook was in the kitchen when Tae-jun came through, and she stopped what she was doing and looked at him with the direct, unglossy expression of someone who has nothing to apologize for and nothing to perform, and he gave her a nod that she returned, and that exchange contained more mutual understanding than most of the conversations that had taken place in the dining room last night. He had Wu coordinate the logistics of his mother's move through the afternoon. He did not supervise it. He handled a backlog of organization business that had accumulated over the Busan trip and tried to give his attention to the things that required it without letting the parts of his mind already working on. Tomorrow consumed the working hours that belonged to today. It was a discipline he had been building for 15 years. Today it was more difficult than usual. Sumin came to find him at noon. He was in the east sitting room on a call when she appeared in the doorway, and he looked at her briefly and held up one hand wait and finished the call before acknowledging her. She stood in the doorway during the call with her arms crossed and her jaw set at an angle that he recognized as the posture she adopted when she had decided to say something she knew was going to be received poorly and was bracing for it. He had watched that posture from childhood. It had always meant she had made up her mind. He set the phone down. He looked at her. "Come in or don't," he said. She came in. She sat in the chair. Across from him, the same chair their mother had used this morning, which he noted without comment. "I know you're angry at me," she said. "That's accurate. I need you to understand what it's been like." Her voice had a controlled shake in it, not tears. Sumin didn't cry in confrontational situations, but the precursor tremor of someone managing a significant volume of feeling through a narrow valve. "For 4 years, Tae-jun. 4 years of watching you change. You stopped coming to family events without her. You stopped consulting Uma about decisions you used to ask her opinion on. Everything became about protecting her, accommodating her, making sure the house ran the way she wanted. The house runs the way I want," he said. "It runs the way she wants," Sumin said. The certainty in it was striking, not performed certainty, genuine. "And I know you don't see it that way. That's part of what I'm trying to explain. She changed you, and the change felt like a loss. And maybe that's not her fault. It's not. But it happened. And Uma and I were trying to find a way back to something. You broke something she was keeping, he said. Something private. You took it out of her hands deliberately. He waited. That's not finding a way back to something. That's deciding someone else's things don't matter. Suman's jaw tightened. It was a piece of paper. It was mine, he said. I wrote it. Which means when you took it, you weren't taking from her. You were taking from me. That landed differently than she'd expected. He could see it in the micro shift of her expression, the slight reorientation of someone who has been carrying an argument in one direction and has just encountered a corner they hadn't mapped. She was quiet for a moment. I didn't think about it that way, she said. I know, he said. She looked at her hands. What's going to happen? He told her. Plainly, the financial accounts, the access to organization business, the immediate consequences and the longer ones that would depend on what the following weeks demonstrated about her understanding of what she'd done. He told her without venom and without softness, the way he delivered information that was simply information and not a performance of emotion. She listened. Her face went through several phases, shock, then the particular stillness that comes after shock when the mind is working very fast, then something smaller and less defended, something younger. She had a way of looking, occasionally, like the 11-year-old she had been when their father died, and that was always the version of her that cost Tae-jun the most to deal with, because it required him to hold two things simultaneously, what she had done as an adult and what she had lost as a child, and hold them without letting the second one undo the first. He was managing that. Appa, she said. She hadn't called him that since she was a teenager. He looked at her. I'm sorry, she said, and this time the shake in her voice had broken through to the surface. Not, I know that doesn't fix the accounts. I know that's not what this is about. I'm sorry. He looked at her for a long moment. I know, he said. That was all. It was not forgiveness, and it was not dismissal, and she understood both of those things and stood and left the room with the composure of someone who is holding themselves together, specifically to get through a door before they stop managing. He sat with the silence. Then Wu appeared. The expression on Wu's face when he appeared in doorways was almost always identical, composed, neutral, flagging nothing in advance of the information itself. But there were gradations within the neutrality, microscopic calibrations that Tae-jun had learned to read over years of working together, and the current calibration was one he recognized and did not like. Tell me, Tae-jun said. Wu set a physical file on the side table printed, not on the tablet, which meant it was something he'd wanted to be able to handle without screens. The Yoon family contact, Wu said. You asked me to find who initiated it. Yes. It wasn't Madam Kang. Tae-jun was very still. Say that again. The initial contact between the Yoon family and this household was not originated by Madam Kang, Wu said. He moved to the file, opened it, and turned it toward Tae-jun. It was originated 14 months ago by a member of the Shin Partnership. The same side of the Shin Partnership that the associate was representing at last night's dinner. Tae-jun looked at the file. The documentation was clean, and Wu's work was always clean call records, message logs from the external communication system the organization used for business contacts, a trail of correspondence that was not ambiguous. 14 months ago, a specific individual on the Shin side of the business alliance had reached out to the Yoon family's business manager. The framing of the outreach visible in the message content was not matchmaking between families. It was strategy. It was an explicit suggestion that the Kang-Shin partnership would benefit from a structural reinforcement, and that the most reliable form of structural reinforcement was a marital one, and that there was, currently, an obstacle to that reinforcement in the form of an existing marriage that the relevant parties on the Kang side were, it was implied, actively working to resolve. They were told, Tae-jun said reading, that the existing marriage was temporary. That's the implication of the language, Wu said carefully. By who? Wu turned to the second page. The name on the second page was not his mother's. It was the name of a man who had been at the periphery of Kang organization business for 3 years, not a core member, not someone with decision-making authority, but someone with access. Someone who attended dinners. Someone who moved in adjacent circles and carried information between them the way certain people do when they understand that information is a currency and have positioned themselves to traffic in it. His name was Jung Byum-suk, and he was the older man who had sat at the far end of the table last night and caught Tae-jun's eye on his way out with something that had looked, at the time, like apology. It had been apology. He told the Shin side, Tae-jun said, slowly, working through it, that the marriage was temporary. Yes, which means someone told him. Yes, and whoever told him believed it was true. He looked up from the file, or wanted the Shin side to believe it was true. Woo said nothing. He didn't need to. Tae-jun looked back down at the file. He turned to the third page, which Woo had evidently been working on throughout the morning. It contained a timeline, the Shin outreach to the Yoon family, the Yoon family's positive response, the correspondence that followed over 14 months, the specific moment 9 months ago when Hae-suk had been contacted by the Yoon family's business manager to arrange the initial visit. She had not started the chain. She had been handed the end of it and had run with it, fully and enthusiastically, in the way she ran with things that aligned with what she had already wanted. But the chain itself had been built by someone working both sides of a business partnership to engineer an outcome that would benefit the Shin family's position within the alliance. They had used his mother's existing grievances as a lever. They had handed her a mechanism for what she'd already wanted to do and let her believe it was her own idea. And last night, the Shin associate had been sitting at that table, watching the results of Fort Fonson's of careful construction, positioned to witness the moment it concluded in his family's favor. Tae-jun closed the file. He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Woo, who was accustomed to these silences, remained standing and did not interpret the length as an invitation to add anything. "Where is Jung Byum-suk right now?" Tae-jun said. "He left the property last night following the dinner," Woo said. "He's currently at a hotel in Gangnam, and the Shin associate. Same hotel, different floor." Tae-jun absorbed that. 2 men from last night's dinner, in the same hotel, neither of them in a hurry to leave the city. The specific geography of that arrangement told him something he had suspected from the moment he'd read the second page. "They're waiting," he said. "It appears so. For the outcome." He stood. He moved to the window. He looked out at the garden, which was gray in the overcast morning light, the gravel paths damp from last night's rain, the ornamental trees his mother had planted years ago still holding their shape. "They built the architecture," he said. "Handed it to my mother. Let her run it, and they've been waiting for her to finish the job so they can step in with a new alliance proposal from a position of advantage." He turned from the window. Which means, when last night fell apart, they were watching in real time. And the associate's presence at the dinner, Woo said carefully, was not incidental. No. He looked at the file on the table. It was verification. He was there to confirm the marriage was ending. The weight of that settled into the room. This was not just his mother's campaign. His mother had been a component, the most emotionally powerful one, the one with the longest reach into the household, the one whose motivations were the most genuine and therefore the most useful. But the campaign had an architect who was not Hae-suk, and that architect had a strategic objective that had nothing to do with family sentiment and everything to do with repositioning a business alliance in his family's favor. Tae-jun looked at Woo. "I need everything, the full Shin file. Every communication between their side and ours for the past 2 years. Every meeting, every financial arrangement. If there are other threads I haven't seen yet, I want them on this desk before tomorrow evening." "By tonight," Woo said. Not a question. By 6. Woo took the file and was at the door when Tae-jun said, "And Woo." He stopped. "Nobody outside this room knows what we found yet." "Understood. Not my mother, not Sumin, nobody." Woo left. Tae-jun stood alone in the east sitting room with the rain starting again outside, light and intermittent, tapping against the glass with the particular irregularity of something that can't decide how serious it wants to be. He thought about the note again. 4 sentences in his own handwriting that had been taken from a box on a shelf by his sister, in a house where his wife had spent 8 months absorbing a campaign that his business partners had helped engineer, using his mother's love as the primary instrument. He thought about the dining room last night and his mother's voice saying he doesn't need to know, and the specific satisfaction in it, the satisfaction of a woman who genuinely believed she was protecting something, who had been handed a plan by people who understood exactly how to make it feel like her own idea, who had operated for 8 months in the absolute faith that her son's sense of family obligation would prevent consequence. He thought about his wife upstairs with the cold coffee and the window and 4 years of patience that had cost her more than she had ever charged him for. He understood now what he was dealing with, not his mother's grief at feeling replaced, not his sister's resentment at feeling lost. Those were real, and he would deal with them as real things, because they deserved that, even now. What he was dealing with, underneath those real things, was a business play. Someone had looked at his marriage and seen a liability, and had decided to engineer its elimination using the most intimate available tools: his family's love, his family's fear, his family's vulnerability to the argument that what they were doing was protection rather than sabotage. That reframing from family conflict to strategic operation changed what tomorrow night needed to be. He had planned a reckoning for his family's behavior. What he now needed to plan was something considerably more structural. Something that would close every avenue that had been opened, address every party that had been involved, and make absolutely clear to everyone who had participated, at every level, that the operation had not simply failed. It had produced the exact opposite of its intended result. By mid-afternoon, the mansion had the particular quiet of a place where something large has recently moved through and left the air still settling. His mother's belongings were being packed in the Upper East Wing with the help of 2 household staff members. Tae-jun did not go upstairs during this. He did not know if Nia did. He was in his office working through a steady stream of organization business that had waited long enough, keeping his mind on the work that was in front of him, and the larger work that was being assembled in the background by Woo and Choi and Ji-young, and the systems he had built over 15 years, precisely for moments like this one. At 4:30, he heard a knock on the office door. Not Woo-woo did not knock. He appeared. Not Soo-min. Soo-min had left the property around 2 o'clock in a car he'd had arranged for her. Not his mother. He would have felt the specific weight of that particular approach before hearing it. Naya opened the door. She was wearing a jacket now, fully dressed, hair up, and she looked like herself in the specific way. She looked like herself when she had moved through something and come out the other side of it, not unaffected, not performing wellness, but upright. She had a quality of uprightness that was not rigidity. He had loved that quality from the beginning, without always knowing how to name it. She had a plate in her hand. He looked at the plate. "You haven't eaten," she said. She set it on the corner of the desk. Rice, soup, something she'd made or asked Mrs. O to make warm, actual food, the kind that appeared when someone was paying attention to the gap between what you needed and what you were doing about it. He looked at the food. He looked at her. "Sit down," he said. She sat in the chair that had held his mother and his sister in succession this morning, the chair that was becoming the seat of difficult conversations, and she looked at him with the open, patient directness that he had been relying on since a rooftop in Itaewon. He told her about the Shin connection. He told her all of it: the file, the timeline, Jung Byum-suk, the 14 months of constructed pressure, the way his mother had been handed a lever and had used it with complete genuine conviction, the associate at the dinner table who had been there to watch the conclusion of something he'd helped engineer. He told her without editing for her comfort, because she had spent 8 months on the receiving end of an operation she hadn't fully understood, and she deserved to understand it now, in its complete form. She listened the way she always listened, fully, without interruption, with the focused stillness of someone who is processing in real time and trusting you to give them what they need to do it accurately. When he finished, she was quiet. She looked at the desk. "Your mother didn't know," she said. "No." He paused. She wanted the same outcome, but she didn't know she was being used to produce it. Naya looked up at him. "Does that change anything for you?" He thought about it. It changes the shape of tomorrow, he said. It doesn't change what she did. She nodded slowly. He watched her absorb the distinction. She is still your mother, Nia said, not defending her, accounting for the full picture. She is, he said, and she genuinely believed what she was doing was right. She did, and the people who pointed her at us knew she would. Yes, he said. That's exactly what they knew. The understanding between them and in that moment was one of the cleaner ones they had managed in the last 24 hours, the kind of understanding that comes when two people are standing at the same altitude, looking at the same terrain, and what they see matches. Tomorrow night, he said. I need you there. I know, she said. Not beside me. With me. She looked at him carefully. There's a difference? Yes, he said. There is. She reached across the desk and pushed the plate slightly closer to him. Eat, she said. He looked at the food, then at her. Something in his chest did the thing it occasionally did in her presence, the thing that had no clean name in any language he'd operated in. The thing that had landed him on a rooftop in Itaewon, asking a stranger whether she thought people were fundamentally good, the thing he had built a marriage around without entirely being able to explain it. He picked up the chopsticks. She watched him take the first bite with the complete equanimity of someone who has just won a small and necessary argument and is not going to make it larger than it is. He ate. Outside, the rain had committed at last steady now, full, the kind of rain that settles into an evening and intends to stay. The mansion was quiet around them, in the way that places are quiet after upheaval, not peaceful but exhausted, every surface holding the residue of what had moved through it. Upstairs, Haesuk's rooms were being emptied. Across the city, in a hotel in Gangnam, two men were waiting for a resolution that had not arrived and would not arrive in the form they expected. And in the Kang family office, a man who had spent 15 years, understanding that every structure has a point where it is most vulnerable, sat across a desk from his wife and ate rice soup in the rain-gray afternoon and thought about what he was going to build tomorrow from. The rubble of what the last 8 months had become. The building would be precise, it would be complete, and it would begin with a room full of people who had assumed, until the moment they walked through the door, that they understood which direction the power in that room was flowing. They were wrong about that. They had been wrong about several things. Tomorrow night he was going to show them exactly which ones. The morning of the second day arrived without ceremony. Tae-jun was already dressed when the light came through the window, dark suit, no tie yet, jacket hanging on the back of the office chair, where he'd placed it the night before, with the specific intentionality of a man who is laying out the pieces of tomorrow, while tomorrow is still hours away. He had slept 3 hours, not from inability, from calculation. There were things that needed thinking through in the quiet that sleep would have interrupted, and the thinking had been worth the cost. By 7, he had spoken to Choi twice, Woo once, and Ji-young in a message that covered 4 specific points requiring her attention before noon. The documentation Choi had prepared was on the desk in a leather folder organized, tabbed, each section exactly where it needed to be for the sequence he had planned. Woo's full report on the Shin connection occupied a second folder beside the first, thicker, with the physical call records clipped behind the correspondence logs. He had read both folders completely the night before. He had read them a second time at 5 in the morning. He knew every word in both of them, now the way he knew the dimensions of rooms he had navigated in the dark by feel, by certainty, without needing to look. At 8:30, Kaya came into the office. She had dressed carefully. He noticed that. Not formally, not in the manner of performance, but with the specific attention of a woman who understands that how you carry yourself in a room matters and has decided to carry herself a particular way. Dark dress, simple, her hair down, which she did when she wanted to take up exactly the space she occupied without apology. The pearl earrings he had bought her on a trip he'd taken to Japan 2 years ago, which she wore rarely and which she had apparently decided today warranted. She looked at the 2 folders on the desk. She looked at him. How many people tonight? She said. 14 in the room, he said. 4 senior organization members, 2 attorneys, 3 business executives from partnership families. The inner circle of the Shin side their principal and two associates. Juum-suk, he paused. And my mother. She absorbed the last item. You're bringing her back. She needs to be there, he said. For the same reason, a person who has been used as a weapon needs to see what they were used for. Not for punishment, he looked at her carefully. For understanding. Nia was quiet for a moment. Then in me, you sit beside me. And what do? He said, you exist. In that room. In the seat beside mine. That's the entire requirement. She looked at him with the expression she sometimes wore. When he said something she hadn't expected and needed a moment to process it as what it actually was, rather than what she'd braced for. Then she nodded. Once. Clean. Okay, she said. The day moved with the specific grinding pace of days that are carrying something enormous toward an evening. Tae-jun handled organization business from 9 to noon with the focused efficiency of a man who has learned to compartmentalize, not by suppressing what's in the other compartments, but by being completely present in the one that's currently open. Phone calls, 2 video meetings, a logistical dispute between distribution heads that required 12 minutes and a specific, unambiguous directive from him to resolve. He gave the directive and moved on. Woo appeared at noon with an update. The Shin principal, a man named Shin Dae-won, 54 years old, who had been his father's contemporary, and had maintained the partnership through sheer longevity through sheer traave and strategic patience, had confirmed his attendance for the evening. The confirmation had come through the formal channel, which meant he had received Tae-jun's summons and had interpreted it as a meeting he could manage. He was bringing 2 associates as Tae-jun had specified. He had not asked what the meeting was about. That told Tae-jun something. A man who doesn't ask what a meeting is about when summoned unexpectedly is either completely confident or completely committed. Shin Dae-won was both. He had spent 14 months constructing a play that he believed was airtight built on a family's genuine internal fractures, operated through a proxy, insulated by layers of plausible deniability. He was coming to this meeting believing he was walking into the aftermath of a success. He was coming to witness the restructuring of the Kang family situation, Tae-jun separating from his wife, the Yoon connection becoming the foundation of a new alliance, and to position himself to benefit from the transition with the particular grace of a man who has been patient enough to wait for the result without appearing to have caused it. What he did not know, could not know, was what was in the 2 folders on Tae-jun's desk. What he did not know was that the proxy Young Byom-sik, currently still in the Gangnam Hotel, had been contacted by Woo that morning and brought to the mansion at 11, where he had spent 40 minutes in a room with Tae-jun and had emerged from that room a considerably different structural element of the evening than he had been going in. The conversation with Young had been short and not loud. Tae-jun did not need volume to achieve clarity. Jung was 51 years old and had spent 30 of those years reading rooms for survival. And the room he walked into at 11 o'clock on this particular morning required approximately 90 seconds to read before all the available conclusions were obvious. He had not tried to deny anything. That, Tae-jun had given him credit for. The man was smart enough to understand when the evidence made denial a waste of time, and smart enough to understand that cooperation in this specific moment was the only available currency he had left to spend. Jung told him everything. It matched the documentation. It matched the call logs. It matched the timeline in Woo's folder. And it added 2 things the documentation had not fully clarified: the specific language Shin Dae-won had used in the early conversations about the Kang marriage, and the specific promise that had been made to Young himself for his role as the internal conduit. The promise had been access, a financial arrangement, a position. Nothing enormous, nothing that would have flagged as significant against the scale of what the Shin family was working toward, but enough to make a man with Young's particular combination of peripheral access and economic motivation willing to carry information in the right direction at the right moments. He had told Hae-suk 9 months ago that the Shin family was prepared to offer a significant restructuring of the partnership terms if the family situation resolved in the right direction. He had framed it as something he'd overheard. He had framed it as an opportunity she could act on. She had acted on it. She had believed she was making a strategic decision of her own devising. She had been a piece moved on a board she hadn't been allowed to see. After Jung left the room with Wu to remain on the property, available for the evening, under circumstances he clearly understood were not optional, Tae-jun sat alone with that information for 15 minutes. He thought about his mother unpacking that conversation 9 months ago. He thought about her sitting across from Young and believing in the complete faith of a woman who genuinely loved her son and genuinely feared for what his choices were costing the family, that she had just been handed a key. He thought about how long she had been waiting for a key. He thought about Nia in the kitchen with Mrs. O's soup 8 months ago, eating alone while the dining room performed a future on her behalf. He stood. He went to find Wu. At 4 in the afternoon, a car was dispatched to the apartment building where Hae-suk had been staying since the previous day. The message delivered to her was brief. Her presence was requested at the mansion at 7. The message did not explain why. Tae-jun had written it himself and had not softened it, because softening it would have been a kindness that tonight didn't have room for, but he had not hardened it either. It was simply a request from her son, and it was phrased that way. She came. He knew she would. Whatever the complexity of everything else between them, that part he had never doubted. The mansion was arranged for the evening by 6. Not a dinner. Tae-jun had been deliberate about that. Dinners in this house had been used for too many purposes in the past 8 months, and he was not going to put this meeting inside that particular frame. The main receiving room had been prepared instead, a formal space, larger, with seating arranged around a long table that was empty of everything, except 2 leather folders placed at the head position and a glass of water for each seat. No candles, no serving dishes. The room stripped down to what it was, which was a room in a house that belonged to 2 people, where a specific matter was going to be addressed. The organization's senior members arrived first. They had been with Tae-jun long enough to walk into rooms, without needing to be told what they were walking into, and they took their seats along one side of the table with the quiet economy of men who had been in difficult rooms before and understood that their role in this one was to be present and to remember what they witnessed. The attorneys came next, Choi and a second attorney from a firm that handled the structural business arrangements, both of them with their own folders. Both of them placed along the table with the specific positioning that said their role was evidentiary rather than participatory. The 3 business executives from partnership-adjacent families arrived together at 7:15, which was either coordination or coincidence, and either way told Tae-jun something about how they'd understood the nature of this evening. Shin Dae-won arrived at 7:20. He came in the way he always came in, unhurried, with the particular ease of a man who has operated at the senior level of something for long enough that comfort in formal settings is simply reflexive. He was in a dark suit, his hair silver at the temples, his face carrying the arranged pleasantness of someone who has prepared an expression for the opening of a room before the room shows him what it actually is. His 2 associates followed a step behind. They settled into their assigned seats. Shin Dae-won looked at the table, at the empty chair at the head, at the folders. His arranged pleasantness remained in place, but something behind his eyes moved a micro-calibration, the kind that happens when a man who is very good at reading rooms reads a room that is arranged differently than expected. Jung Byum-suk was already seated when the Shin contingent arrived. Tae-jun had made that choice, deliberately placed Jung at the table before Shin walked in, visible, present, his face carrying the gray, washed-out quality of a man who has spent the last 8 hours understanding his position fully. When Shin Dae-won saw him, the arranged pleasantness faltered for exactly 1 second. Then it reassembled. 1 second was enough. Hae-suk arrived at 7:25. She came in through the side entrance. Wu had arranged that specifically, so she entered from the left of the room rather than the main doorway. She was dressed formally. Her face was composed in the way that her face was always composed when she was bracing for something she couldn't fully predict. She looked at the room, at the people in it, at Jung Byum-suk, and at something that crossed her face when she saw him, that crossed her face when suspicion, but was adjacent to it, a flicker of something trying to become a question. She took her seat. The last seat at the table, to the right of the head position, remained empty. At 7:30, Tae-jun walked in. He came in from the main entrance, and he did not come alone. Nia walked beside him, not a step behind, not a step ahead. Beside him, when they reached the head of the table, he held her chair and she sat, and then he sat. And the room adjusted to the two of them, the way rooms adjust to certainty when they encounter it. Nobody spoke. Tae-jun looked at the table. He took his time looking at it, at each face in sequence, without rush, with the particular quality of attention that made people feel accurately seen rather than merely observed. He reached the Shin principle last. He held that look for a moment. Then he opened the first folder. "I'll keep this simple," he said. His voice in the room was what it always was. In rooms like this, not raised, not performed, the voice of a man who is not trying to fill a space with volume because he understands the space is already his. 8 months ago, a coordinated effort began to end my marriage. That effort used members of my family as its primary instrument. It was not a family dispute. He turned one page in the folder. It was a business operation run from outside this family, designed to destabilize my household and reposition the alliance structure of my organization in favor of one specific party. He looked up. "I have the documentation, complete, going back 14 months. The room was entirely still. The three partnership executives exchanged a look that was brief and controlled. The organization's senior members were watching since Shin day one. The attorneys had their folders open. Hae-suk, at the corner of his peripheral vision, had gone the specific, rigid still of someone who has just received information that is reorganizing the architecture of the last 8 months in real time and is not yet finished processing what the reorganization means. Shin Dae-won said Tae-jun. The voice was measured. Avuncular even. The voice of a man reaching for the register that had served him in difficult rooms for 30 years. "I think there may be some misunderstanding about. You contacted the Yoon family 14 months ago." Tae-jun said it the way he might read an address, factual, exact, stripped of editorial. "Through an intermediary, you placed inside my organization's peripheral network. You told them the Kang marriage was temporary. You told them the relevant parties on the Kang side were working to resolve it." He paused. "You used my mother's grief about my marriage as the mechanism. You told her through Young that the Shin family was prepared to offer improved partnership terms contingent on the family situation resolving in your preferred direction." He closed the folder. "You handed her a plan and let her believe it was her own." Something happened to Shin Dae-won's face. Not the collapse of composure, he was too disciplined for that. It was more like the microcompression of a structure under load that hasn't yet failed, but has communicated very clearly that it has reached a threshold. The pleasantness did not disappear. It changed in texture, the way something changes when the thing supporting it shifts. "That's a serious allegation," he said. "It's a documented one," Tae-jun said. He looked at Choi, who opened the second folder and slid a specific set of pages toward the center of the table. "Call records. The original outreach to the Yoon business manager. The follow-up correspondence. The internal message from your side in which the language obstacle to be resolved appears twice in reference to my wife." He let that land. "In writing. Under your family's communication header." Shin Dae-won looked at the papers. He did not reach for them immediately. That moment, the moment of not reaching, told Tae-jun more than anything Shin could have said, because an innocent man reaches. "A man calculating his next move does not, Young," Shin said. Not loudly. He didn't look at Young directly. He said the name in the middle distance, toward the table, as though addressing a concept rather than a person. Young did not respond. Shin's jaw moved. He looked at the papers. He reached for them now, too late to mean what reaching would have meant 30 seconds ago. He looked at the first page with the expression of a man reviewing something he already knows the contents of. The room waited. One of the Shin associates, the younger of the two, shifted in his seat. The shift was small, involuntary. The kind of physical adjustment that happens when a body is receiving information through the atmosphere of a room that the mind hasn't fully caught up to yet. Tae-jun watched Hae-suk. She was looking at Jung Byum-suk. Jung was not looking at her. He was looking at the table in front of him with the focused attention of a man who has decided that his best contribution to the current proceedings is stillness and is committed to it with everything he has. Hae-suk's hands, folded on the table in front of her, tightened. He saw it from across the room. Her knuckles shifted. The tightening was brief, and she controlled it, but it was there. She was understanding. He watched her understand it in sequence, the pieces arriving in the order. They made sense, each one reorganizing the ones before it, the whole picture assembling from the components she already had, plus the component she had just been given. He watched her face go through the understanding, the way faces go through things that are large and structural, not with obvious expression, but with the specific stillness of a person whose interior is doing significant work. She looked at Tae-jun. He held her gaze. In her eyes was something he had not expected to see from her in this room, tonight, given everything. Not shame. She was not a woman who wore shame easily or quickly. Something older than shame. The particular devastation of a person who has loved something and used that love as a weapon without knowing who was directing the weapon's aim. He looked away. Back to Shin Dae-won. Here is what's going to happen, Tae-jun said. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, and when he moved, the room adjusted to the movement the way it always adjusted to him with attention, with the specific awareness that the energy in the space had just shifted into a higher gear. The Kang-Shin partnership is terminated. Effective from tonight, confirmed in writing by both attorneys before anyone leaves this room. The terms of dissolution are already drafted. You'll find them in Choi's folder. He looked at the second attorney. The financial arrangements between our organizations will be unwound on a timeline that Choi and your counsel will negotiate. At the standard terms for partnership dissolution, nothing punitive beyond the legal standard. He paused. I am being fair about the financials piece, because I choose to be, not because the documentation in front of you leaves me obligated to be. The specific precision of that last sentence was not lost on anyone in the room. He watched it register in the face of the senior Shin associate, who was old enough to understand exactly what the documentation on the table meant for their position in a legal dispute, and was doing the math visibly. You're not going to do this, Shin Dae-won said. The avuncular register was gone. What was underneath it was flatter, more direct, and considerably more honest. A man who's been patient for 30 years and is encountering an outcome he did not calculate reaching for the only remaining tools he has. Your father and I, my father is dead, Tae-jun said. 3 words, level, final. And what you built with him is not currency in this room. Shin Dae-won's jaw set. You're throwing away a 30-year relationship, he said, over a domestic situation. You're going to damage your own organization's position in 3 markets because your feelings. Stop. Tae-jun said it without raising his voice, and Shin Dae-won stopped. Not from intimidation, from the specific quality of the word, which landed with a weight that came from something different than volume. You used my mother's love for me as a lever. You used my family's private grief as a mechanism. And you placed an operative inside my network to carry the load. He looked at Shin steadily. Don't talk to me about a 30-year relationship. Tell me what the relationship was worth in the 14 months you spent dismantling my household. The room was silent. One of the partnership executives cleared his throat very quietly, and then clearly wished he hadn't. Shin Dae-won looked at the papers in front of him. He looked at Tae-jun. He looked at the senior organization members along the opposite side of the table, and he read what their faces contained, which was not hostility, exactly, but the complete and settled attention of men who have placed themselves on the right side of a room and know it. He looked finally at young Byum-suk. Young was still studying the table in front of him. Shin Dae-won sat back. It was not surrender. It was the movement of a man recalibrating, pulling back from an untenable position to find the next available ground. Tae-jun watched him do it with the focused attention of someone who has been in enough negotiations to know that the most dangerous moment is not the confrontation, but the second after a man has decided to stop fighting one way, and is deciding whether to start fighting another. What do you want? Shin said, not aggressive. Transactional. The question of a man who has moved past the pretense and arrived at the actual conversation. I want the documentation signed, Tae-jun said. I want the partnership dissolution confirmed in this room tonight, with the attorneys as witnesses. I want your formal acknowledgement verbal here, in front of everyone at this table, that the Yoon family introduction was originated by your side as part of a deliberate strategy to interfere in my marriage. He paused. And I want you to explain it to my mother. The last item landed differently than the others. Several people at the table shifted. The younger Shin associate looked at his principal. The partnership executive, who had cleared his throat earlier, looked at the window. Shin Dae-won looked at Hae-suk. Hae-suk was already looking at him. Her face had gone through the full sequence of understanding and had arrived somewhere on the far side of it, somewhere that looked, from where Tae-jun was sitting, less like emotion and more like the specific, hardened clarity of a woman who has been shown something about herself that she cannot unknow. Her voice, when it came, was quiet. You told me the Shin family saw an opportunity for both families, she said. She was speaking to Shin Dae-won, and she was speaking the way people speak when they are reviewing a record, allowed to verify it is what they thought it was. You told me through Young that the timing was right, that if the situation resolved, the family would benefit, that it was what my husband would have wanted for Tae-jun. She stopped. You used my husband. The last 3 words were not loud. They were the quietest thing she had said. Shin Dae-won did not answer immediately. Hae-suk, he started. You used my dead husband's name, she said, to get me to do what you needed. The room received that in silence. Tae-jun watched his mother's face in this moment with the specific attention of someone who has been paying very close attention to a person for 36 years and is seeing something new. The rigidity in her posture, the composed invulnerability she carried into every room, it was still there. It was not gone, but there was something behind it now that was visible through it, the way something is visible through glass when the light changes. And what was visible was not weakness, but the specific, naked grief of a woman who has understood a betrayal that was aimed at her through the most undefended part of her. Her love for her husband, her certainty that she knew what he would have wanted. She had been carrying that certainty as a shield for 11 years since his death. Shin Dae-won had reached through the shield, used the shield's own weight against her, and she had never felt the hand. Until now, Tae-jun stood. He moved from his position at the head of the table toward Shin Dae-won with the deliberate, unhurried pace that he used when there was something that needed to be said in close proximity. He stopped when he was standing directly beside Shin's chair. He looked down at the man. Shin Dae-won looked up at him. Sign the dissolution, Tae-jun said. Say it in this room. And explain yourself to my mother. He held the look. Those are the 3 things. If you do all 3, we end tonight with the financial dissolution and nothing else. If you don't, he did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. The documentation on the table and the people around it completed the sentence more eloquently than words. Shin Dae-won looked at the papers. His hand, resting on the table beside the folder, was very still. Then he picked up the pen that Choi had placed at each seat. He signed. The scratch of the pen on the paper was the loudest sound in the room. He put the pen down. He looked at Hae-suk. And what he said in a voice that had lost all of its registers except the one underneath everything else was 3 sentences that were not sufficient and were not intended to be sufficient, but were true, which was the only thing they were required to be in this room. He said, I initiated the contact with the Yoon family. I suggested the narrative about the marriage being temporary. I used Young to deliver the message to you because I needed you to move on your own without knowing where the information came from. Hae-suk looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the table. Tae-jun moved back to his position. He remained standing. He looked at the room, at the senior organization members, at the executives, at the attorneys with their open folders, at Yoon Byum-suk's gray face, at his mother, at Shin Dae-won's 2 associates, who had been cargo in this meeting from the beginning. And finally he looked at Nia. She had not spoken. She had been in the room for 45 minutes, and she had not said a single word, and she had not needed to. She had sat in the chair beside his, with her back straight and her hands folded on the table and her presence absolute, and she had occupied the seat his mother had once tried to empty with the complete unperformable authority of a woman who is exactly where she belongs. She met his eyes. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked back at the room. The partnership documents will be finalized by Choi and the Shin Council within the week, he said. Everyone at this table has witnessed what was said and signed tonight. That's what you're here for. He looked at the executives. The Kang organization's partnerships remain as they are, with the exception of the Shin arrangement. Anyone who has questions about how tonight affects their relationship with this organization should speak to Ji-young through the standard channel. He looked at the organization seniors. We're done. People began to move. The Shin contingent stood Shin Dae-won last, with the heavy deliberate movement of a man who is 60 years old and has just watched something he built for 14 months dissolve in 45 minutes. He moved toward the door, without speaking further, his associates close behind, and as he passed the point where young Byum-sik was still seated, he did not look at him, which was the last act of a man who has decided that what he's walking away from is already severed. The executives left quickly, with the efficient departure of people who are not directly implicated, but understand they have been in proximity to something significant and would prefer to process it elsewhere. The attorneys stayed Choi, gathering the signed documents with the methodical care that made him worth every invoice. The organization's seniors filed out, nodding to Tae-jun as they passed. The last one paused briefly and said nothing, just looked at him, with the expression of someone who has seen a thing done correctly and is acknowledging it, then left. Jung Sum-suk stood. He looked at Tae-jun. Tae-jun looked at him. We will explain what's next, Tae-jun said. Nothing else. Jung walked out the side entrance. The room held 3 people, Tae-jun, Nia, and Hae-suk, who had not moved from her seat and was looking at the empty chair, where Shin Dae-won had been sitting, with the expression of someone looking at a space that has just revealed itself to be something different from what she thought it was. Tae-jun looked at his mother. She felt it and looked up. He expected her to speak first. She always spoke first. It was the essential quality of how she navigated silence. But she did not. She looked at him with the new expression he had noticed during the meeting, the thing visible through the glass, when the light changed, and she sat with it in a way he had never seen her sit with anything. Then she looked at Naya. Naya looked back at her. The distance between them across the room was not large. Maybe 12 feet, maybe less. But it was the distance of 4 years and 8 months, and a campaign that had cost both of them things they were not finished accounting for, and neither of them pretended otherwise. Hae-suk opened her mouth. She closed it. She looked down at her hands. When she looked up again, she looked at her son, and what she said was not an apology, not yet. That was not what this moment was, but something that was the precondition for one. I didn't know, she said. I know, he said. I thought I was protecting you. I know that too. She looked at Nia again. I wasn't protecting you, she said. And this was addressed to Nia directly, which cost her something visible and did not try to hide the cost. I was protecting an idea of what your life should look like, and I let someone use that to hurt you. She stopped. Her hands were very still on the table. That's not the same thing as not knowing. I knew what I was doing. I just didn't know why I was really being allowed to do it. The room was quiet. Nisa was looking at Hae-suk with the expression she wore when she was processing something at full depth, no surface reaction. Just the work happening underneath. The same focused stillness that had been present every time she'd absorbed something difficult in the last 4 years. Then she said, I know. 2 words, exactly what she'd heard her husband say. She had chosen them deliberately. He was certain of that. He knew how she chose things and what they meant in her voice. In this room, to Hae-suk, was a thing that language could point at, but not fully contain. Hae-suk looked at her son one more time. I'm going to need some time, she said. Take it, he said. She stood. She smoothed her jacket, the same gesture from the morning before, the 2 careful passes of her palms, and she walked toward the side exit. She paused at the doorway. She did not say anything else. She left. The room held 2 people. Tae-jun stood at the head of the table for a moment, looking at the empty chairs, the signed documents in Choi's hands as the attorney packed them efficiently and slipped out with a nod, the glass of water, at each place that nobody had touched. He looked at his wife. Naya was still seated. She was looking at him with that particular expression, the open level one, that he had been orienting toward since a rooftop in Itaewon, and that he suspected he would be orienting toward until there was no more orienting to do. "Are you all right?" she said. He considered the question with the genuine attention it deserved. "Not entirely," he said. "Good," she said. "That means you're paying attention." He looked at her. She looked back. The room was very quiet, and the house was quiet, and the houseways around it and outside the rain had stopped sometime during the meeting without either of them noticing, and the night was doing whatever night did when the things it had been holding were finally set down. Tae-jun walked around the table. He held out his hand. Naya looked at it for a moment. Then she took it. He helped her to her feet not because she needed help, but because the gesture meant something specific, and they both knew what it meant. And what it meant was that the next thing was the two of them walking out of this room together into whatever came after the hardest night, and he was not going to walk out of this room without her hand. They walked out together. The house received them with the particular quiet of a place that has been through something and is still. "In the corridor, Mrs." O appeared briefly from the kitchen dushen with a tray, and then clearly decided the tray could wait and disappeared back into the kitchen with the exquisite 11-year tact of a woman who understood exactly when a moment did not belong to her. Tae-jun and Nia walked through the corridor, side by side, and reached the bottom of the staircase and stopped. He looked at the stairs. She looked at them. "We should eat," she said. "Yes," he said. "And then sleep. Probably." And then she started. "And then tomorrow," he said. He looked at her. "Tonight is finished. Tomorrow is a different thing." She looked at him for a moment with the expression that had no clean name, the one from rooftops and quiet rooms, and the space between what words could do and what the rest of it had to carry. "Okay," she said. They went upstairs. The house held them. And the signed documents in Choi's folder, and the empty chairs in the receiving room, and the particular, exhausted quiet of a night that had asked everyone in it for more than they expected to spend, all of it was still and settled and done, waiting for the morning to come and show them what they had built from the morning after the meeting arrived, the way mornings arrive after things that have cost a great deal quietly, without fanfare, with the particular gray light of a day that is not yet sure what it intends to be. Tae-jun woke before Nia. He lay still for several minutes, which was unusual for him. He was not a man who woke slowly. He was a man who opened his eyes and was already somewhere else in his head before his feet hit the floor. But this morning he lay still and looked at the ceiling and let the events of the previous 48 hours settle into whatever shape they were going to take as memory rather than experience. There was a difference between living through something and understanding it, and the understanding required this: the lying still, the ceiling, the quiet. Nia was on her side facing away from him, her breathing even and slow. She had slept hard, the sleep of someone who has been running on reserves for months and has finally been given permission to stop. He had noticed, in the small hours before his own sleep came, that she had relaxed in a way she hadn't relaxed in. He tried to calculate it and arrived at 8 months, which matched the timeline exactly, which told him that her body had been maintaining a readiness posture in this house for every day of those 8 months, even while her face presented otherwise. He thought about that for a while. He thought about the note he had rewritten. It was still in the jacket pocket from yesterday. He had not given it to her, yet the evening had moved through its necessary sequence, and the note had waited, folded, in the jacket that he'd hung over the chair before they'd finally slept. He thought about it now as a small unfinished thing in a week full of larger ones, and he decided that unfinished things needed finishing, and that this one specifically had been waiting long enough. He got up carefully, moved to the jacket, retrieved the folded paper, set it on the nightstand on her side of the bed, where she would see it when she woke. Then he went downstairs. Mrs. O was already in the kitchen when he came through. She had coffee ready not because he'd asked, but because she had worked in this house for 11 years and understood the rhythms of it better than most. She poured a cup and set it in front of him without comment when he sat at the kitchen counter, and then she returned to what she'd been doing before he arrived, which was the particular Efficient morning work of a woman who knows her place in a house and is completely at ease in it. He drank his coffee. After a while he said, "Mrs. O." She looked at him. "How long have you been aware of what was happening in this house?" She was quiet for a moment. Not because she didn't have an answer. He could see this, that she had the expression of someone who is deciding not the content of what they're going to say, but the form. "Since the first dinner," she said. He nodded. He had expected something close to that. "You didn't say anything." "It wasn't my place," she said. Then carefully, "And she didn't want me to." He looked up. "She asked you not to contact me." "Not in those words, Mrs." O set down what she'd been holding and looked at him directly, the direct, unglossy look he had seen her give Nia the night of the first dinner, the soup without pity look. She said it would only make things harder. "The second time the bags were moved, I offered to call your office." She said she paused. "She was protecting you." I think she'd been doing it so long she didn't know how to stop. Tae-jun looked at his coffee. "She ate alone," he said. Not a question. Just the saying of it, out loud, in the kitchen where it had happened. "Once," Mrs. O said. "I made sure it was only once." He looked at her. "The second night they tried to send her in here, Mrs. O said. I told the staff that the dining room table had enough seats for everyone, and that if Madame Kang had concerns about the seating arrangement, she was welcome to raise them with me directly." She picked up what she'd set down and resumed her work with the equanimity of someone who has long ago made peace with the choices they've made. She didn't. He sat with that for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you." She didn't make anything of it. She nodded once. The way you nod when someone thanks you for something you would have done, regardless of whether it was acknowledged, and went back to work. He finished the coffee and went to his office. The Choi firm called at 8:30 with a procedural question about the dissolution timeline that required 15 minutes of his attention. He gave it the 15 minutes and moved on. Woo appeared at 9 with an update on Young Byum-sik, who had spent the night at a location Woo's team had arranged and was prepared to discuss the longer-term terms of his situation. Tae-jun told Woo to give him until afternoon and then schedule it. The work of the morning was ordinary work, and he did it, and somewhere in the middle of doing it, he understood that the ordinary work was part of what the recovery from something like this looked like, not a dramatic conclusion, but a return to the daily mechanism of a life, taken up again with the knowledge of what it had cost to almost lose it. Naya came downstairs at 10. She had the note in her hand. She found him in the office, and she stood in the doorway, and she held up the folded paper, and she looked at him with an expression that was not large and not theatrical, and was everything. He said, "I remember all 4 sentences." She said, "I know." "I remember them too." She looked at the paper for a moment. Then she folded it again, carefully, the same folds as the original, and held it in her closed hand. "Where did you write this one?" she asked. "Desk drawer," he said. "Same office. Not a report this time?" "I didn't have a report available." She looked at him. The thing that moved across her face in that moment was not gratitude. Exactly. It was bigger than gratitude, and quieter than it, the specific expression of someone who has come through a fire and is standing on the other side of it, and is not yet certain what they are now, but is beginning to understand that. They are still themselves, still here, still held. She crossed the office. She sat in the chair across from him. Not the client chair, the other one. The one she used when she came to sit with him in the evenings occasionally, the one that was not about business. "What happens now?" she said. "With what specifically?" he said. She considered all of it. He looked at the desk. He thought about the honest answer to that question and decided to give it, because she had been receiving managed versions of things for 8 months, and what she deserved now was the unmanaged version. "The Shin dissolution takes about 3 weeks to complete cleanly," he said. "There will be some friction with the markets. It affects 2 specific distribution channels that I'll need to replace. Jiyoung is already working on alternatives." He paused. "Jung will have to leave the country for a period." He understands that. Woo is managing the mechanics. He looked at her. "The organization is stable. That's not a concern." "And your mother," Nia said. He was quiet for a moment. "She needs time," he said. What she learned last night about how she was used, that's not a thing you absorb in one evening. She's going to need to sit with it before she can do anything useful with it. He looked at his wife. I'm not in a hurry. I'm not closing the door. But I'm also not going to pretend the last 8 months didn't happen. And neither should you. I don't intend to, Nia said. She said it simply without heat. I'm not going to perform forgiveness before I've actually gotten there. Good, he said. But I'm also not going to hold it forever, she said. That's not in me. I know that about myself. He looked at her carefully. I know it too. She turned the folded note over in her hand once. Then she put it in her jacket pocket, the inside pocket, the one close to her chest with the specific deliberateness of someone returning something to the place where it belongs. He watched her do it. I owe you an apology, he said. She looked at him. Not for what they did, he said. That's theirs. I owe you an apology for what I didn't see. For the distance between loving you in private and protecting you in the rooms where it mattered. Those aren't the same thing, and I operated like they were for a long time. He held her gaze. That's mine. She was quiet for a long moment. I know, she said. Is that all you're going to say? For now, she said. The rest of it takes longer than one conversation. He accepted that. It was the right answer, and he knew it, which was part of why he had married her, and part of why everything that had been done to displace her from this house had failed. You cannot run a successful operation against someone whose judgment is fundamentally sound, because sound judgment does not behave the way the operation needs it to. Sat together for a while without speaking, which they were good at, which was something they had built in the private space of the marriage that no one else had been able to access or damage, and which was still there, intact, on the other side of everything. 3 days later, Sumin called. Tae-jun took the call in the east sitting room. She had clearly prepared what she was going to say. Before dialing, he could hear the specific cadence of prepared language in her first 2 sentences, the way they arrived too smoothly to be spontaneous. Then she got through the prepared part, and the smoothness fell away. And what was left was his sister, 29 years old, sitting somewhere in the city without the financial infrastructure she had operated inside her entire adult life. And the rawness of that was audible in a way that prepared language couldn't cover. She said, I don't know how to do this. He said, do what? Any of it. I've never Tae-jun, I've never paid for anything myself. Not really. I didn't understand that until this week. He was quiet. That's not an excuse, she said quickly. I know it's not. I'm not saying it to make you feel sorry for me. I'm saying it because I think you should know that I genuinely didn't understand what I was built on until you removed it. A pause. It's humbling, being shown that. Yes, he said. It is. I'm sorry about the box, she said. And the note. I'm sorry about all of it. I knew what I was doing was wrong while I was doing it. That's the part that's hardest to sit with. He let that sit for a moment. I know, he said. Does she know I'm sorry? You could tell her. A long pause. She'd take my call? I don't know, he said. You could find out. Another pause, longer. Okay, she said, quietly. Okay. The financial arrangements remained as he had set them. He was not punishing her for the rest of her life. That had never been the intention. But the removal of automatic support was a thing that needed to stand long enough to mean something, and he intended to let it stand for precisely as long as it needed to. She would be fine. She was smarter than she had been allowed to demonstrate inside a life that had never required her to demonstrate it. And he suspected that what the next year would show about her was something that the previous 29 had not. A week after the meeting, Choi called to confirm that the Shin dissolution documents had been finalized and signed by the Shin family's legal representation. The financial unwinding would proceed on the agreed timeline. The Shin family had made no public statement and would not. Tae-jun had not expected one. Men like Shin Dae-won did not announce their losses. They absorbed them and recalculated, and eventually appeared in different rooms with different configurations, because that was the nature of men who had been operating at that level for 30 years. Tae-jun was aware of this. He was not concerned by it. The documentation in Choi's files was the kind of documentation that remained available indefinitely, and that both parties understood would remain available indefinitely. which was the most reliable form of insurance that existed and required no further action to maintain. Ji-young had 2 replacement distribution channels confirmed by the end of the second week. Neither was as historically established as the Shin arrangement, but both were structurally cleaner, which Tae-jun noted as an unexpected dividend of an otherwise costly situation. The organization, as he had told Nia, was stable. The house was a different matter. Stability in a household is not the same thing as returning to the way things were, and Tae-jun understood this without needing to articulate it. What the house had been before the 8 months was gone, not the physical structure, but the particular quality of daily life inside it that had been operating under conditions neither of them had fully named. What the house was now was something else, something that required figuring out. They figured it out in the way that they figured most things out, not with a conversation designed specifically to figure it out, but through the accumulation of small adjustments over the days following the meeting. The way they sat at the table in the morning, which was differently, now not because the table had changed, but because the table no longer meant what it had meant during 8 months of dinners performed for an audience. The way the staff moved through the house, which was differently too, the careful praise gone, displaced by something more ordinary and therefore more comfortable. Mrs. O made breakfast and did not arrange her face around the management of anyone's expectations, which turned out to be a significant relief for everyone, including Mrs. O. Nia spent time on the phone with her sister in Atlanta. She told her more this time. Not all of it. She was not a woman who narrated herself completely to anyone, including her sister, which was a quality of privacy that had nothing to do with withholding and everything to do with the understanding that some things belong to the person they happened to. But she told her enough, and her sister, who had spent 4 years waiting to be told enough, received it with the grace of someone who had not pushed when it would have been easy to push and was now being rewarded for that restraint. Her sister said, "Are you staying?" Nia said, "I was never leaving." Her sister said, "I know. I just needed to hear you say it." That conversation happened on a Tuesday afternoon while Tae-jun was in a meeting on the 3rd floor. Snaya sat in the garden after the call ended and looked at the ornamental trees his mother had planted bare now in the late season, their branches against the sky with the specific, undecorated honesty of things that have let go of everything unnecessary and are simply waiting for the next version of themselves. She sat out there for a long time. She was not sad. She was not happy. Exactly, happiness felt like the wrong word for what this was, which was more like the state of a person who has come through something real and is on the other side of it with most of themselves intact, which is not the same as unchanged and is not the same as unscathed, but is considerably better than the alternatives. She thought about Hae-suk. It was not a simple thing to think about. She had been trying to think about it honestly, without the version she wanted it to be, and without the version she feared it was, and what she arrived at when she stayed close to the actual truth was this: the woman had loved her son with a completeness that had blinded her to the shape of what she was doing, and had been handed a mechanism for her blindness by a man who understood exactly where to press. That did not make what she had done acceptable. It made it human in a way that was harder to hold than simple cruelty. Because simple cruelty you can place at a clean distance, and simple cruelty does not require you to understand it. This required understanding. Nia was working on that. 14 days after the meeting, Hae-suk called. Nia was in the upstairs sitting room when the call came through the room where Soo-min had taken the box from the shelf. The room that had been reorganized by various people over the past several months, and that Nia had finally returned to its original configuration 2 days ago. Replacing the box on the shelf, where it had always been, repaired now, the latch reset by a craftsman Tae-jun had contacted without being asked. She looked at the number for a moment. She answered centered. Hae-suk did not use prepared language. That was the first thing Nia noticed. She had expected prepared language. Hae-suk was a woman who prepared, who arrived at everything with her words arranged in the most functional possible order. But what came through the phone was not arranged. It was halting in the way that things are halting when the speaker has tried several times to organize something and has arrived at the understanding that organization is wrong for what this is. I have been trying to write this as a letter. Hae-suk said. I have been trying to write it for 10 days. I can't write it. Okay, Nia said. I need to say it to you, not to Tae-jun. To you. A pause. I am aware that an apology for what I did is not sufficient. I understand that. I'm not calling because I think an apology finishes this. Another pause longer. I'm calling because I spent 8 months treating your home like a problem I had the right to solve, and I want you to hear me say that I understand what I was doing now, in a way I didn't understand then. Not because I was stupid, because I didn't let myself look at it clearly. Looking at it clearly was inconvenient for what I wanted. Nia was quiet. You were never the problem, Hae-suk said. The words came more slowly than anything she'd said before them, with the specific weight of something that has been worked toward over a long distance, and is arriving rough-edged but true. The problem was that I loved my son for 36 years, before you were in his life, and when you came into it, I didn't know how to make room for that without feeling like I was losing something. I told myself I was protecting the family. I was protecting my fear. She stopped. That is not a thing I can fix by saying it, but I'm saying it. Nia held the phone. She looked at the box on the shelf. I know you believed what you were doing was right, she said finally. Yes, Hae-suk said. That is exactly the problem. Nia absorbed that sentence. It was one of the more honest things Hae-suk had ever said in her direction, and she received it as what it was not an excuse, not a justification, but the specific acknowledgement of someone who has understood, at some cost, the mechanism of their own failure. I'm not able to tell you where this goes from here, Nia said. I don't know yet, I'm being honest about that. That's fair, Hae-suk said. But I'm not closing the door, Nia said. I want you to know that. Not because I owe you an open door. Because I don't want to become someone who closes doors as a reflex. She paused. That's for me, not for you. A long silence. I understand the difference, Hae-suk said. I know you do, Nia said. They stayed on the phone for another minute, without either of them speaking. Which was not an awkward silence. It was the silence of two women who have said the thing that needed saying, and are sitting with the weight of how long it took to get there. Then Hae-suk said she would let Nia go. Nia said okay. They ended the call. Nia sat in the upstairs sitting room, with the phone in her lap for a while. Then she got up and went to find her husband. He was in the garden, which surprised her. He was not often in the garden during the working day. He was standing near the ornamental trees his mother had planted, his jacket off, his hands in his pockets, looking at the branches the way she had been looking at them from the same approximate angle 2 days earlier. She came to stand beside him. He looked at her. She called. Yes, he looked at her face, reading it the way he always read it, not asking for a summary but for the full picture, which her face gave him without requiring explanation. Okay, he said. Not entirely, she said. Good, he said. That means you're paying attention. She looked at him. He almost smiled. You used those words first. I know I did, she said. You weren't supposed to use them back. It seemed like the right time. She looked at the trees. He looked at them too. They stood together in the cool afternoon air of the garden, with the city existing somewhere beyond the estate walls in its indifferent and continuing way, and the quiet between them was the quiet of people who have been through something with the essential things still intact. I talked to Sumin, she said. He looked at her. When? Yesterday, she said. She called me directly. I don't know if you knew, I didn't. She was not very polished about it, Nia said. She didn't have a speech. She kept starting sentences and not finishing them. She paused. I think that was the most honest she's ever been with me. What did you say? I told her I wasn't ready to have a full conversation about it yet, Nia said, but that I was glad she called. She glanced at him. Was that right? You don't need me to tell you if it was right, he said. I know. I'm asking what you think. He considered it. I think it was exactly right, he said. She nodded. Then Tae-jun, yes, I need you to do something. He looked at her. I need you to stop managing what I see, she said. Not the big things, you handled the big things. I mean the small ones. The way you assessed what I could handle and calibrated what you told me. You did that before all of this started, and I let you, and I shouldn't have. She looked at him steadily. I want to know what's happening in the places that affect my life. Even when you think it'll worry me, especially then. He was quiet. I know you were protecting me, she said. Yes, he said, and you were protecting me. We were both doing it, and neither of us told the other we were doing it, and the space that created is exactly where 8 months of damage happened. She held his gaze. So we stopped both of us. He looked at her for a long time. Agreed, he said. I'm serious, Tae-jun. I know you're serious, he said. I said agreed. She looked at him one more moment. Then she looked back at the trees. He turned back to them too. After a while, he said, she planted these the spring after my father died. She came out here every morning for 2 weeks and worked on this garden. I thought she was grieving. My uncle told me later she was furious at everything, at the situation, at having to figure out how to run a household that had always been structured around my father. She had nowhere to put it, so she put it in the ground. He looked at the branches. She's a difficult woman. She has always been a difficult woman. But that's not all she is. Nia said nothing. She let him say it without commentary. Because it needed to be said, and it needed to be received, and she was capable of receiving it, not as a defense of anything that had been done, but as the fuller picture of a human being whose love had been used against her and who was now, somewhere in the city, sitting with the understanding of that in whatever way she was capable of. What do you need from me? Nia said, regarding his mother. Not asking him to choose or to explain or to defend, just asking what he needed directly. He looked at her. Time, he said, the same thing she needs. A different time, a different pace. But time. Then take it, she said. I'm not going anywhere. He heard the specific weight of that sentence, which was not just an assurance about the current situation, but something that reached back through 4 years and forward into whatever was coming. And he let it reach where it needed to reach before he answered it. I know, he said. The anniversary was 6 weeks later. He had not told her where they were going. He had told her to wear something comfortable and that they would not need the security team for the evening, which she had registered with a raised eyebrow because there had not been an evening without at least one of Wu's people within proximity since the early months of their marriage. He drove himself. That was the first indicator. He drove a car she had not seen in the estate garage before, not black, not armored, something ordinary, and when she looked at him from the passenger seat, he met the look without explanation and kept driving. The restaurant was small. She recognized it before he parked. It was the restaurant from the first year, not their first date, but the third, the one where they had stayed for 4 hours, because the conversation had taken on that particular quality of conversations that refuse to end, the quality of something alive that doesn't want to be set down. The staff had changed, but the space was the same, the low lighting, the tables close enough together that you were always aware of the other people without being intruded upon. The menu written on a board near the kitchen in handwriting that had never been updated. They sat at a corner table. No one recognized him. Or if they did, they had the grace not to show it, which in this particular context amounted to the same thing. He ordered what she used to order before she had learned what he liked, and started splitting things with him. And she looked at him across the table when the order came and understood that he had remembered exactly, which was the kind of remembering that had never been the thing he was supposed to be good at, and which she had discovered early was the thing he was actually best at. They ate. The conversation was not large. It did not need to be. They talked about small things of film she had been meaning to watch. A problem in one of his distribution channels that had resolved in an unexpected way. Something Mrs. Of had said that morning that had been funny in the dry, underplayed way that Mrs. O was occasionally funny. The way people talk when the enormous things have been addressed, and what remains is the texture of an ordinary life together, which is, in the end, what all the enormous things were protecting. Over the second course, he put something on the table. It was small, a thin box, the kind that held a single piece of jewelry. She looked at it. I'm not replacing it, he said. Your grandmother's ring isn't replaceable. I know that. She looked at him. Open it, he said. She opened it. Inside was a ring she had not seen before, not a replacement. As he had said, not an imitation. Something different, simple and specific. The kind of thing that required knowing a person rather than knowing a category. She picked it up and looked at it and felt the shape of it in her fingers and understood that he had spent some portion of the past weeks making a decision about this specific object, and that the decision contained everything. He was not always able to say in complete sentences. She put it on. She looked at it on her hand. Then she looked at him. "It fits," she said. "It should," he said. "I measured your hand while you were asleep." She stared at him. "You measured my hand while I was asleep." "Very carefully," he said. She looked at the ring. She looked at him. And what crossed her face in that moment was the thing that had no clean name, the complicated, earned, fully sighted love of a woman who has chosen a man clearly and has been shown, over years, that the choosing was right, not because he is uncomplicated or perfect or easy, but because he is genuinely, precisely himself and has never asked her to be anything other than what she is. She reached across the table. She put her hand over his. He turned his palm up and held it. They sat like that for a while in a small restaurant where nobody was watching them, in particular, in a city that continued indifferently in all directions, in the particular quiet of a life that had been attacked from the inside and had held. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Go ahead." "The night you came back early from Busan," she said, "when you were standing in the corridor, how long were you there before you walked in?" He considered this. "Long enough," he said. "Long enough for what?" "To understand what you'd been doing," he said, "and what it cost." She looked at him. "You should have walked in sooner." "Yes," he said, "I should have. I needed to hear it. I needed to hear you defending me." He looked at her carefully. "You said my husband doesn't know you're doing this." And she said he doesn't need to know, and I needed to understand what I was walking into before I walked into it. He paused. That was probably not the right instinct. "You'd been standing in that room a long time already." "It's okay," she said. "It's not entirely okay," he said. "But it's done. Both things can be true," she said. "Yes," he said. "They can." The restaurant began to thin out around them, other tables concluding, people gathering coats and moving toward the door, with the warm, unhurried energy of an evening well spent. They stayed after most of the other tables had cleared, not because they had more to say, but because neither of them was ready to end the specific quality of this particular hour, which had something in it that belonged to the early years, before the weight of the last 8 months had settled, not the naivety of those years. Nothing that simple. But the essential quality that had been from a rooftop in a Tiowan and had survived everything that had tried to interrupt it. He paid. They got their coats. Outside, the night was cold and clear. The first genuinely clear night in weeks, the sky doing what skies do when the weather finally lifts and the stars are able to come through without interference. He opened the car door for her. She stopped before getting in and looked at the sky for a moment. Just a moment, long enough to acknowledge it. Then she got in. He drove home. They came through the gate of the estate, and the familiar shape of the house resolved through the windshield lit from within. The garden dark on either side. The entrance, where she had stood holding a suitcase some weeks ago, now simply the entrance, the way it had always been meant to be. He stopped the car. They sat for a moment in the quiet. "I have something to tell you," she said. He looked at her. She was looking at the house, and on her face was an expression he could not immediately categorize. He was very good at reading her face. And this was a configuration he had not seen before, which was information. And the information was that whatever she was about to tell him was something she had been carrying and had chosen this moment, this particular night, this car in front of their house, to put down. She turned and looked at him. She told him. The night held them in the car for a long time after she finished speaking, and what moved across Kang Tae-jun's face in those seconds was not the composure he wore in rooms where people watched him and drew conclusions from what they saw, but the raw, unmanaged expression of a man who has been through a hard season and has arrived, at the end of it, at something so far from what the season tried to take from him that he does not immediately have words for the distance. He reached across and took her hand. He held it. He did not speak for a long moment because the thing she had told him was one of those things that language reaches toward and does not quite arrive at. and he was a man who preferred not to say the incomplete version of things he meant completely. Finally, he said, "Are you—" "Yes," she said, before he finished. Because she knew the question, and she knew the answer, and she had been knowing the answer for 11 days, which was how long she had been waiting for the right moment to hand it to him. "How long have you—" "11 days," she said. He looked at her. She looked back. And the house waited in front of them, lit from within, the door that had been used against her and reclaimed and used against her. Again now simply a door, the entrance to a place that belonged to her and to him and to whatever was coming next, which was not the end of anything, but the furthest thing from it. He opened his door, came around to her side and opened hers. She stepped out. He did not take her hand this time. He put his arm around her, fully, the way he slept, the way he had stood in that upstairs bedroom after the worst night, and held her, while she finally let the exhaustion win, the way that said, without requiring language, that he was here, present, not managing the distance between them, but closing it entirely. They walked to the door. He opened it. The house was warm, quiet inside, the kind of warmth that comes from a place that has been through a storm and has been restored, not to what it was before the storm, but to what it is capable of being when the people in it choose each other clearly and refuse to stop. She stepped through first. He followed. The door closed behind them, and the night continued in all directions, indifferent and vast, and inside the house on the hill, the woman the Kang family had spent 8 months trying to unmake stood in the entrance of her own home with her husband's arm around her and a ring on her finger and news that was not yet ready for the world but was already real and already theirs. And she did not need anyone in any room anywhere to confirm for her what she already knew completely. She was exactly where she belonged. She had always been.